Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have yet another late night conversation. I am back from my travels, back in New York City. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. For those of you who may not be familiar, the way these streams work is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks are then followed by a roll call. And that roll call is where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations, and we find out who it is that's on the other side of the camera, and that's always a great thing to do. And then from there, the remainder of the show is me answering your super chat questions for the rest of the night. That is what the remainder of the show is. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a super chat. A super chat or a Rumble rant is appreciated. That's what makes the second half of the show happen. I am refreshed. I had a nice little trip to Los Angeles, which I'll comment on later in tonight's broadcast. However, I do want to make some announcements before we get started here. First things first, tomorrow there will be a very, very important press conference with good friend of the Center for Political Innovation, none other than Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter will be giving a press conference tomorrow at 1 p.m. 1 p.m. tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Scott Ritter is giving a press conference. It'll be in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club. Obviously, in-person seating is limited, but here is the YouTube link for the Scott Ritter Emergency Press Conference about the danger of nuclear war. It's a very, very important press conference. So I urge you to tune in. It's going to be very, very important. I'll drop the link in the chat there. It's going to be a really, really important press conference with Scott Ritter. I hope that I'll be able to ask a question. I'm planning to attend. Maybe I won't be, but that's fine. But I'm definitely going to be there. I'm not going to miss this. Scott is my good friend. And if there's anybody who knows how dangerous nuclear war is and how dangerous the current escalations that the United States is engaged in against Russia are, it's Scott Ritter. So Scott is an amazing person. He would be in Russia right now if they hadn't dragged him off his plane. He was going to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and they dragged him off his plane to prevent him from going, confiscated his passport. And tomorrow he's having a Washington, D.C. press conference. So don't miss it. It's going to be a very, very important press conference about the danger of nuclear war and the need for de-escalation with Russia. He is a former weapons inspector. He, basically set up, the protections from nuclear war that were set up in the last years of the Soviet Union. Just a brilliant man, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation and his press conference tomorrow. But he's talking about a very, very serious issue, which we'll be talking about later on this stream. So that's the first big announcement we've got. Tune into this Scott Ritter press conference tomorrow at 1 p.m. There is the link. Now, the next big announcement that I wanted to make for tonight is that we have an organization called the Center for Political Innovation, CPI, and we are doing amazing things. And our group is marching ahead. We just had a great event this weekend that was sponsored by our friends at LA Family Church, and it was dedicated to peace on the Korean Peninsula. And I'm going to talk about that event. It was packed. It was a packed event. I got to meet many people for the first time. Shout out to Mary and Ron. Shout out to Dan. Shout out to Pasta from Convo Couch. Shout out to Ishmael, right? Shout out to, who else did I meet? Oh, man. Shout out to Jorge. Shout out to Celestino. Wow. I don't want to forget anyone. Shout out to Paulo, right? Wow. Who else did I see out there? I mean, there were just so many people. Shout out to Nikisha, right? Oh my goodness. I don't want to forget anyone. Shout out to Albert. Who else? But it was a great event. And if I missed your name, please don't take it personally. I met many people that are part of our CPI community for the first time, people that watch these streams, and it was just an absolutely amazing event. Warm reception. I mean, there was well over 100 people in that room. If you haven't watched the video, go watch the video. It's here on the YouTube channel. Probably going to show some clips later, but that's why you need to join the Center for Political Innovation, because we are building a movement, not an online thing, but a real in-life movement for anti-imperialism and constructive, optimistic socialism. That's what we're doing, and we need you to be a part of it. So join the Center for Political Innovation. Join CPI. It's going to be really, really great. We would love to have you as a member. We've got great stuff that we're doing. So sign up and become a member of the CPI today. We can involve you in our activities. People around the country are joining. We've had a couple new memberships this week. Yeah. Shout out to David, who I also met. He's a new member of CPI. David, known as The Van. Met David. That was pretty awesome. Shout out to you, David, if you're watching. I mean, I met so many people from our CPI community. It was really, really tremendous to meet all these great people. Shout out to Clifford. Oh, wow. Who else? I don't want to forget anybody. It was just so amazing to be out there in LA and meet a lot of great people. So join the Center for Political Innovation. Become part of our community. Help us do outreach and engage people. Help us build an anti-imperialist community of solidarity dedicated to optimistic, patriotic socialism. All right. So that is the next announcement. And another announcement. It looks like I'm headed back to Los Angeles at the end of the month for the Peace Cup. Peace Cup Los Angeles 2024, hosted by the LA Galaxy soccer team, is happening June 28th through 30th. That is happening in Los Angeles. And this is the Peace Cup, is a soccer game, a sporting event that is used to build peace around the world. And it is happening this year under rather unique circumstances, because this year, the Peace Cup 2024 is going to be dedicated to peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. And Peace Cup 2024's goal is to have Peace Cup 2025 in Pyongyang. You heard that right. The goal is for Peace Cup 2025 to be in North Korea. And that would be huge, because in order to go to North Korea, you got to get special permission from the U.S. government, right? It's illegal. They'll take your passport away. Things on the Korean Peninsula right now are very, very bad. But Peace Cup 2025, the goal is to have it in North Korea. And so this weekend at Peace Cup 2024, there will be a lot of different speeches and activities dedicated to promoting the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. They got the LA Galaxy, a professional soccer team, to sponsor this. And it looks like I'm headed back to LA to support Peace Cup 2024. Not 100% confirmed yet, but it looks like I'm headed out there. So if you're in the LA area, I would find a way to make your way to the LA Galaxy Sports Stadium. I would find a way to do that, because it looks like it's going to be a great event, and there's a good chance I'll be there. And we may be having a stream on this channel dedicated to the Peace Cup. The Peace Cup is dedicated to bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula. So there you go. I wanted to make that last announcement. So for those of you that are watching, you probably know how we do this, but just a quick reminder for those of you who may not be familiar with how these streams work. First, I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks or whatever it is I want to talk about, reacting to current events and news, etc. Then after that, we do a roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations, and we find out who is on the other side of the camera. And then from there, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a Rumble rant, send me a super chat, send me a Rumble rant or a super chat. Super chats are on YouTube, Rumble rants are on Rumble. So any support for this channel is appreciated. Give me something to talk about in the second half of our show. So now I am going to jump in to the opening remarks for tonight. I'll be taking note of the questions as they come in. Folks, this is a serious situation. There's a reason that Scott Ritter is having that very, very important press conference. Russia, along with Belarus, have just conducted and started conducting tactical nuclear weapons drills. This is the second stage of tactical nuclear weapons drills. We actually have video of these tactical nuclear weapons drills. All right. Now, tactical nuclear weapons are not as big as conventional nuclear weapons, but at this point, we've got rehearsal for nuclear war going on. Now, why is this happening? Well, Caleb, it's because everyone knows that Putin and Russia are crazy and they just want to murder Americans. That's why. No, there's a reason that this is happening. We need to talk about this reason. Recently, the United States government authorized the Ukrainian forces to use U.S. supplied weaponry to conduct attacks on Russian soil. All right, because there is at this point a war going on, and because Ukraine is losing that war, they are absolutely losing. Worse, I mean, it's over basically. The United States is determined to keep this conflict going until the last Ukrainian is dead. They have dragged every man out of his home into that country. People are fleeing the country en masse to avoid, but at this point, the U.S. government has given authorization to Ukraine to carry out strikes on Russian territory. And the reason that they gave is such a ridiculous reason. They said that, well, Russia shouldn't have a safe haven over its border. Why should Russia not have a safe haven in Russia? This makes absolutely no sense, right? Russia shouldn't have a safe haven in Russia. Well, if there's any country that should have a safe haven in Russia, it's Russia. This is an absolutely ridiculous claim. They say, "Oh, well, if Ukraine's going to fight the war, they can't just let them have a safe haven in Russia." No, Russia can have a safe haven in Russia, right? Meanwhile, we all know that all across Europe, the extremist anti-Russian forces, the Ukrainian fanatics, the Ukrainian ultranationalists are being trained in Germany. They're being trained in France. They're being trained in Belgium. They're being trained in Poland. So the idea that, oh, well, if an area has a, quote, safe haven for one side in the war, a strike on it is justified, that would then give Russia the right to strike almost every NATO country, because all the NATO countries are, pretty much all of them, are involved in supporting the Ukrainian forces. And so saying that, that this is a safe zone, this is ridiculous. But it's also important to note that there's another factor that is causing, Russia to have to reveal and demonstrate its nuclear capacity. And that is that the US government just approved and made it legal to fund the Azov Battalion, which is the openly Nazi division of the Ukrainian military. I don't know if you saw this, but, in Ukraine, ever since 2014, in 2014, the Ukrainian government was toppled, right? There were a whole bunch of US-funded protesters who destabilized Ukraine, and the elected government of Viktor Yanukovych was removed, and a new government came into power, a government that was not recognized by the people in the eastern regions. The people in the eastern regions seceded from Russia because they didn't recognize this government that was imposed by a violent movement. Well, far-right extremist organizations, neo-Nazis, people who admire Nazis and think Hitler was a good guy. I mean, we're talking literal Nazis, torchlit parades, swastika tattoos, the whole nine yards. They were a big part of this coup. And they've been tearing down World War II memorials because they think that Russia and the Soviet Union was wrong in World War II and that Hitler was right. They have been glorifying an actual Nazi collaborator named Stepan Bandera, a guy who rounded up Jews in Ukraine and took them to concentration camps, a guy who rounded up Poles in Ukraine and took them to concentration camps. They've been glorifying Stepan Bandera, and this Nazi division, the right sector, other ultra-nationalist groups have been a big part of the anti-Russian extremism fomented by the United States and Ukraine for a long time. However, recently, well, let me back up. However, as the USA was giving weapons and military aid to Ukraine, there were members of Congress who said, let's make an amendment that no Nazis get American weapons. We can give aid to the Ukrainian government, but we're not going to give aid to any actual Nazis. And they made a specific law. It was called the Leahy Amendment, which said that, okay, we're going to give a bunch of weapons to the Ukrainian military. We're going to give a bunch of aid, a bunch of American taxpayer money to the Ukrainian military. But the Nazi groups, we have to make sure none of this gets to the Nazi groups. Well, we all know how budgeting works, right? What they did is then the money that they didn't have to spend because they got all this extra money from the United States, that went to the Nazi groups. So Ukraine was funding and fomenting these Nazi groups. They actually made the Azov Battalion, which is an open Nazi division fighting force. They actually made them into a wing of the Ukrainian military. But this amendment existed that said they could not give any aid to the actual Nazi groups. However, that just changed. The U.S. State Department just put out a memo saying that the Azov Battalion, the Nazi wing of the Ukrainian military, is allowed to get American aid. American weapons, American financial support is now directly going to the Nazis in Ukraine. And the dishonesty from the U.S. State Department is unbelievable. Their excuse is they say, well, this Azov Battalion that's actually part of the Ukrainian military, it's not the same as the Azov Battalion that was formed during the coup. Well, it's funny because it has the same name, and it's the same people in the battalion, and they have the same Nazi symbols, and they have the same Nazi tattoos, but it's totally different, right? The militia, those guys are no good. But once they became part of the government, they must have just changed their beliefs, and all the Nazi tattoos and all that must have gone away. I mean, it's the most dishonest, disingenuous thing. They're saying, oh, it has the same name, but it's a totally different group. Right. Same name, same ideology, same literal people, but it's a different group. That is the State Department's line. They say it's not the same group that it's outlawed to give aid to. And that is completely and utterly ridiculous. The U.S. government just changed its own rules, got rid of the Leahy Amendment, and is now directly giving aid to the Nazi division of the Ukrainian armed forces. This is a fact. This is not a lie. This is not, look it up. We even have the State Department's response, where the State Department says, well, the reason we're doing this is because it's not the same as the group that we outlawed, right? The group that we outlawed was a militia, but this is a government division, so it's not the same. You can't make this up. It is the exact same people. It is the exact same slogans. It's even the same name, Azov. But somehow it's just a joke. It is a complete and utter joke. And they already traveled around the United States, spoke at Ukrainian churches. There's already been a lot of American Nazis who have gone over to Ukraine to fight with them and on their side. But here we are. This is where we're at. This is the situation we're in. So, of course, Russia is saying, look, you attacked us on our territory. You're funding open Nazis. And our rules are that if we get attacked on our territory, we have the right to respond with nuclear weapons. So they are now demonstrating with these drills in Belarus that they have the capacity to use tactical nuclear weapons. And they're engaged in the second round of drills. Now, if you don't understand how dangerous this is, right? Russia does not want to use nuclear weapons. Why would they do that? Right? They're right there next to Ukraine. All that fallout, all that, radiation would blow right into Russia. They don't want to do this. But the United States is so determined to provoke them, and so determined to keep this conflict going, and so determined. At this point, what has the United States not done to Russia? We now know that horrendous shooting at the Crocus Concert Hall was conducted by individuals who were cooperating with Ukrainian intelligence, right? They were on their way to the Ukrainian border. They've even found more evidence linking them to Ukraine. And the U.S. government made a big point of letting Russia know they knew the attack was coming, because they issued a travel warning a couple weeks before the attacks. I was in Russia, and the headline was that the American government just said, don't go to any big concerts in Russia because there might be an attack coming up. They just did that just to let Russia know that the attack that they were going to blame on ISIS, they were actually involved with making it happen. So they shot up a concert and killed a bunch of teenagers who went to a rock and roll concert. They overthrew the Ukrainian government. They subjected the people in Ukraine that don't hate Russia, that are in the eastern regions, Russian-speaking people with more pro-Soviet views, etc., subjected them to 8 years of bombing. Ukraine has talked about getting nuclear weapons. They've torn down all the World War II memorials. And now they've conducted strikes on Russian territory with U.S.-made weapons. At this point, right, the USA is just asking, come on, Russia, show us what you got. And Russia is demonstrating a huge amount of restraint. Can you imagine what the response would be if there was a mass shooting at a concert here in America? Hundreds of American teenagers were killed, and it turns out the terrorists who did it were in bed with Russia, or were in bed with China, or in bed with some other country. Can you imagine what the response would be, right? If some terrorist group or somebody launched missiles onto U.S. territory, and they found out that Russia had given them the missiles and given them the go-ahead to do it, we would respond. They are going out of their way to provoke Russia as much as they possibly can. And so Russia is saying, look, guys, just so you know, we have tactical nuclear weapons. And one of the reasons that we have stated that we would use nuclear weapons is if there's an attack on our territory. You just did an attack on our territory. So, we're showing you our capability of using tactical nuclear weapons. It's a very frightening situation. It's very scary. And we should be outraged that our leaders think that somehow this is acceptable, that this is somehow the best use of American taxpayer money. This is what our leaders should be focused on, not trying to build peace, God forbid. No. Not trying to build peace in the world. No. Not trying to make relations between countries better. No. Instead, we should be focused on dividing the world and escalating tensions. It is absolutely outrageous what our leaders are doing. It is absolutely insane, right? Russia is having to demonstrate its nuclear capabilities because there's attacks taking place on their territory, because actual Nazis are getting U.S. weaponry sent to them. This is all insane. This is all absolutely insane. And if you're an American, you should be angry about it, because this is not being done in our interest. This is being done in the interests of very rich and powerful people that sit at the center of a global system called imperialism and are doing this to enrich their super profits. Why does the United States hate Russia? During the 1990s, the USA didn't hate Russia. During the 1990s, the USA got along with Russia very well. Why? Because Russia was down for the count. Russia was bleeding out. It was dying economically. The fall of the Soviet Union, the breaking up of their socialist economy, the looting of the country was devastated. And they had to import all their food from the United States because their collective farm system was ripped apart and collapsed. They were importing all their products from America. They were an impoverished country. The 1990s were a very, very bad time in Russia. But during those years, the U.S. government loved Russia because it wasn't a competitor anymore. It was a captive market. It was a client state. They were relying on American imports. They were down for the count and bleeding, and Wall Street reigned supreme. Big banks like HSBC Bank from Britain were looting the place and getting rich. And back then the USA had no problem with Russia. And in fact, the USA meddled in Russia's elections. And that is a fact. That is a fact that no one ever talks about. There's all this talk of election meddling. And nobody wants to acknowledge that there was a huge amount of election meddling from the United States in order to make sure that Boris Yeltsin, a president who was wrecking Russia's economy, was able to stay in power. And I will actually show you, now that I've figured out, I figured out how to put it on the screen. I'm going to show you how brazen and how blatantly the USA intervened in the Russian elections in 1996. Because a lot of people, I say, the USA interfered in Russia's election in order to get Boris Yeltsin reelected in 1996. And I say that, and people say, oh, that's crazy, Caleb. That's a conspiracy theory. That's just a conspiracy theory. You must have gotten that from RT, right? I bet you read that on a conspiracy website. Well, no, I didn't hear it on RT, even though RT bends over backwards, is held to a much higher standard than mainstream media is, because people accuse us of being propaganda. We double fact check everything, because no matter what we say, we get accused of being propaganda. So we have a higher standard of accuracy. But regardless, right? Because that is a thing that people say, and because they say, oh, you know, anything that RT says, it can't be true because it's from Russia, and you know, if you don't believe RT, which, you know, mainstream media has bent over backwards to convince people not to believe RT, I would recommend what was said by Time Magazine. This is Time Magazine from 1996. Yanks to the rescue. The secret story of how American advisors helped Yeltsin win. So the USA not only meddled in Russia's elections in 1996, a mainstream US media publication bragged about the US government meddling in Russia's elections. Well, Russia was economically falling apart during the 1990s. Mass unemployment, sex trafficking, drug addiction shooting through the roof, a 900% increase in suicide. Not a good time in Russia. The man who was making it all happen, the president who was presiding over the economic demolition of Russia, he ran for re-election in 1996, and the USA did everything it could to make sure that he won the election. So much so that Time Magazine bragged about it. There's even a documentary showing how the Clinton administration interfered in Russia's election to make sure that Boris Yeltsin was the winner and that the economic demolition of the country continued. Now, during these years, the USA and Russia got along just great. It wasn't until Russia's economy started improving, wasn't until Russian President Vladimir Putin got elected, that the USA started speaking of Russia in negative terms. After Russian President Putin got elected, he began implementing his election strategy, which was to utilize state-run oil and gas to stabilize the Russian economy. Russia has a huge amount of oil and has a huge amount of natural gas, and the stated strategy of the Russian president was to utilize oil and gas to create what he called national champions, which are two state-run, energy companies. He created Gazprom and Rosneft, and he made them huge state-run energy companies that started selling oil and gas on the international markets. And then they used the revenue from that to subsidize the reindustrialization of Russia, to reboot the Russian steel industry, the Russian titanium industry, the Russian coal mines, to rebuild the Russian economy with state control over natural resources. And the Russian president implemented this strategy very gradually. Right? It wasn't immediate. And there was a lot of negotiation with various wealthy oligarchs, and gradually over the course of the first decade of the 21st century, the Russian economy was gradually restructured around state-run oil and gas. And with that state-run oil and gas revenue, they rebuilt the Russian economy. And then suddenly, Russia was a threat once again. It was a competitor. Why? Because every ounce of oil and every gallon of gasoline that somebody bought from Russia, they did not buy from ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron. Russia was once again a competitor on the international markets. It was no longer a captive market. It was no longer an impoverished, desperate country. Because Russia dared rebuild itself and become stronger, Russia became an enemy. And that's why one of the first things the United States did in response to this whole conflict in Ukraine, as the special military operation got going, what did they do? They blew up the Nord Stream pipeline right? Russia has lots of natural gas. And in Europe, they have their cold winters, and the Germans were very much wanting to buy Russian natural gas. And they built a pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline. And so the United States blew it up. And the whole world knows the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. No one even pretends otherwise. After the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up, people in the European Union thanked the United States for doing it. The United States threatened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. They said, if Russia goes into Ukraine, that pipeline will be destroyed. The whole world knows the USA blew up this natural gas pipeline. The USA won't admit doing it because that's illegal. It's blatantly illegal. If you go and blow up a pipeline, you go to jail for terrorism, right? Destroying and targeting infrastructure. It's an act of terrorism. And let me mind you that the Biden administration, the Biden White House, the same White House that is constantly telling us about, oh, we're so environmental, we got to protect Mother Nature, oh, CO2 and climate change, we got to stop emissions. When they blew up a pipeline, do you think that's good for the environment? Blowing up a natural gas pipeline, do you know what the result of that was for the environment? I mean, it was, you want to talk about a huge amount of pollution, right? You try blowing up an oil pipeline or blowing up a natural gas pipeline and see what the results are for Mother Earth. I mean, it just reveals how blatantly hypocritical our leaders are. That they, you know, and it also reveals how the whole thing is about profits. They're afraid of losing the European markets. If Europe buys oil and gas from Russia, who's right there on their border, then they're not buying it from American energy corporations. It's cutting into their profits, right? And that's what imperialism is. Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, the export of capital. Big multinational corporations spreading their tentacles across the planet, holding back development, seizing sections of the globe as captive markets, as spheres of influence, right? This is what Vladimir Lenin wrote about in his book, Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And that is what the United States at this point has as its economic system. And imperialism is in a crisis. It's in a crisis because it cannot handle technology. It cannot handle the huge economic advances that have happened because of computers and artificial intelligence. And you know, under this system, things like self-driving cars, labor-saving technology, great technological advances tend to lead to long-term economic crises. And as the rate of profit is dropping, and as human labor is replaced by technology, the imperialists are becoming more and more desperate. They are becoming more and more desperate to seize sections of the world for themselves, to maximize their super profits as the rate of profit goes down. And because they are becoming more and more desperate, they are becoming more and more warlike. They are becoming more and more militaristic. They have to drive their competitors off the market. They have to destroy Russia. They have to destroy China. They have to destroy Venezuela and Iran and Cuba and any country that would dare break free from them. This is what imperialism does. As the rate of profits goes down, as more and more sections of the world establish their independence, they become desperate, right? And you can put the conflict that's taking place in Gaza, you can put it in the same context, because we all can see how Netanyahu is trying to expand it into a regional war against Iran. We can see how they're already talking, the Israelis, about how underneath Gaza there's all this natural gas profit that could be made. It's unbelievable how blatantly this is about the meltdown of the capitalist system on an international level. They are desperate to regain control of the world. They are desperate to regain financial control of the world. They see Russia and China as competitors. They see Iran and Venezuela and Cuba as competitors, and they want to beat down their competition. and they want to establish a monopoly for themselves and rake in profits from across the planet and make the world poor, keep the world poor, and make the world even poorer so that their profits can continue to rise to the top. Meanwhile, Russia and China, along with Iran and Venezuela and a number of other countries, they represent an alternative model on the global stage. They represent an economic order based on central planning of the economy, based on rational control of the means of production, and based on countries trading with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation. The Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they represent an alternative to imperialism. They represent an international economic order that prioritizes growth, and countries can gain as they trade with each other on a win-win basis. And of course, that is a threat to the imperialists. It's a threat to them because it doesn't have the same built-in systemic crises that their system has. But on top of that, it enables countries to break free, and it gives countries in Africa an alternative to trade with. They've got other countries that they can trade with. They don't have to do the trade with the United States that leaves them victimized, that leaves them economically devastated. And so the alternative world that is rising, the anti-imperialist global order, and a number of countries that are not socialist or part of this anti-imperialist bloc, but will just trade with anybody. Countries like India, countries like Brazil, a number of countries are saying, why do we have to tolerate what the United States is doing? Why do we have to accept the raw deal that the United States is offering us, right? You look at countries throughout the world. There are so many countries that are captive markets of Wall Street, that are captive markets of imperialism, that are just devastated economically, right? You look at Haiti. Haiti has been under the gun, under the economic domination of the United States and NAFTA for so long. And how are they doing, right? You look at Central America. You compare Honduras and Guatemala to Nicaragua. Honduras and Guatemala are the captive markets of the United States. The United States controls those countries economically. They trade with the United States, and they are impoverished. There are whole sections of Guatemala and Honduras where people don't have running water. They don't have electricity. They don't even speak Spanish. They speak indigenous languages still. They don't have literacy. And then you compare it to Nicaragua, where 98% of the country is electrified, where they have wiped out illiteracy with Cuban volunteers. You compare that to Nicaragua, where the slogan of the government is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. And they have a worker entrepreneurships, micro-entrepreneurship program that creates worker cooperatives. They have raised so many people out of poverty, and they are cooperating with China to build and build and build. It's a completely different system because they are part of this new economic order that is emerging in the world. They are not part of the dying Western imperialist system. And because of that, Nicaragua is rising while Honduras and Guatemala are continuing to sink into greater poverty and instability, while they continue to be a playground for the drug gangs, right? And there's many examples of this. Under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. And it was under the leadership of Gaddafi that the world's largest irrigation system in Africa was built. The great man-made river was built, right? Gaddafi, with his socialist, Islamic socialist economic system, made Libya a prosperous country. Meanwhile, so many African countries languish in poverty because of U.S. imperialism. So many African countries that have vast resources. Nigeria with its huge amounts of oil and its minerals, the Central African Republic, so many countries that are under the domination of the United States and have so many resources are impoverished. And of course, the United States couldn't tolerate Libya being the country that it was based on the Islamic socialist system of Gaddafi. This was the Green Book. We published the Green Book which was the basis of Gaddafi's Islamic socialist system. The ideology of Libya is spelled out in the Green Book. So the United States overthrew Libya's government in 2011 with a color revolution that turned into a civil war. And then the NATO bombs came. And now that Libya has joined the free market, it's joined the U.S. open international system, it has once again become a colony of imperialism. Now Libya has slave markets. Now Libya is impoverished. Sections of the country don't have electricity. People are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out of Libya now that it has joined the Western imperialist system. There's a reason that a number of countries in West Africa just asserted their independence, kicked out the United Nations, kicked out U.S. troops, and aligned themselves with Russia and China. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that so many sections of the globe have remained impoverished while under the domination of the United States. But yet Russia and China began the 20th century as impoverished societies and both lifted themselves up into being superpowers in the 20th century. There's a reason that Cuba has the greatest medical school in the world. There's a reason that Bolivia had the highest rates of GDP growth of any South American country throughout the 2010s and the early 2020s. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for these things. The dying Western financial system, where profit dictates production and people become homeless because there are too many houses, and people become hungry because there is too much food, where the invisible hand, the irrational drive of individual owners to maximize their wealth, when a society that puts that in command, that system is dying. The Western imperialist system is dying, and around the world, socialism is rising. And it is a new form of socialism. It is socialism of the 21st century. It is socialism with Chinese characteristics in China. It is Ba'athist Arab socialism in Syria. It is Bolivarian socialism in Central and South America. It is Juche ideology on the Korean Peninsula. It is not capitalism, but Islam in Iran. Socialism has changed. There's a market sector, and there's the necessity for people to own their own businesses, to produce consumer goods and other things that make life fun. It is much more respecting and tolerant and embracing in many places of Christian faith or Islamic faith or religion. Socialism has changed, and the Soviet Union is never coming back. But socialism is rising around the world, while the Western imperialist system, with its radical individualism, its reducing of human beings into financial calculations, its alienation of people from each other, that system is dying. It is dying all across the world, and as it dies, it is becoming more desperate and vicious. And I have long maintained that the future of America lies in breaking out of this system and adopting socialism with American characteristics, a uniquely American form of socialism to rebuild our country economically, to provide jobs and healthcare and education to all. We will never have Chinese socialism in America. We will never have Cuban or Korean socialism in America. The only type of socialism that we'll ever have will be an American socialism that embraces the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, that embraces the deeply passionate religious feelings of the American people, that rejects the drive for degrowth, that celebrates individual liberty and individual initiatives. Just as socialism in the world always brings with it unique brands, we need socialism with American characteristics in this country. We need a society where the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power here in this country are forced to work in the interests of society overall, and the rule of the dollar and the chaos of the market is eliminated. And instead, we have a leadership that invests in our greatest resource, the people. It is human labor that creates all wealth. And it is human beings that generate all the wealth of this world. And it is human beings who should be invested in. We should provide jobs for all, and health care for all, and education for all, and schools for all. And we should provide it not as a handout, but as an investment. Because if we're going to have a wealthy country, we need to have educated people to invent new things and make wise decisions. We're going to have a strong country. We're going to need a healthy, productive workforce that can get good medical care. We're going to have a wealthy, strong country. We're going to need people that have what they need to survive. We're going to need strong families where children are loved and cared for. We're going to need strong communities that offer the best to the next generation. And all of this is very much in line with who we are as a people. We, the American people, are the people who defeated the British Empire because we believed in economic growth and development. And they wanted us to remain just a captive market, just a temporary trade route in their global empire. And we said, no, we believe in building and constructing. And so we created our country, demanding the right to develop, demanding the right to control our resources. This is the country that abolished slavery with heroic abolitionists like John Brown and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. We had a mass religious revival, the Second Great Awakening, with people all across the country saying that this country must turn around and repent from the evil of slavery. And as a result of a wave of anti-slavery activism and anti-slavery awareness and revolts of the slaves themselves from Nat Turner and others, and as a result of that, you had a civil war in which slavery was destroyed. That civil war was really the Second American Revolution. It was a glorious moment where slavery was defeated. And the American people, black, white, came together to reject an evil economic system called slavery that was keeping the country impoverished. You can talk about the labor movement and the labor unions that were built demanding the rights of workers on the job. You can talk about the peace movement of the 1960s that said that the Vietnam War had to end, and all the young people who went out and got arrested and got beaten up because they wanted to stop the Vietnam War. They wanted to stop the American government from bombing and killing children in Vietnam. There are many examples of American heroism, American solidarity, and American patriotism and American anti-imperialism. Patriotism and anti-imperialism walk hand in hand. If you really love your country, you would not want your country to go to war and destroy another country. Patriotism means loving your own country, not hating someone else's. And there is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism. Because if you want to truly love the world, you need to love your own country, which is part of it. And if you truly want to love your own country, you should want your country to be peaceful and have a healthy relationship with countries all over the world. Patriotism and internationalism walk hand in hand. And both of them, both patriotism and internationalism, are the antithesis of imperialism. Because imperialism is neither patriotic nor internationalist. Imperialism destroys America. Imperialism reduces the American people into being colonial foot soldiers. It sends young men from Pennsylvania and Ohio and Texas to die in Iraq, to die on the African continent, to die in Afghanistan in order to enrich the profits of Wall Street bankers. That isn't patriotism. Imperialism closes the factory in Michigan down so that Wall Street fat cats can enrich themselves by exploiting the non-union workers of Mexico. Imperialism destroys countries around the world to the point that people flee into the United States and they find dead bodies on the American border with Mexico every single day. Imperialism funds the drug gangs, the heroin dealers, the narco traffickers that are filling our neighborhoods in this country up with drugs and devastation. Imperialism funds Israeli bombs, Israeli tanks, and Israeli murder, while children in the Bronx and children in West Virginia go hungry because Barack Hussein Obama cut their food stamps. Imperialism is not patriotic, and imperialism is not internationalist. Imperialism is about dividing the world, saying you're with Russia and China or you're with America. It's building a new Berlin Wall. Imperialism is building blocks and building blockades, separating and isolating some countries while economically exploiting and devastating others. Imperialism is not internationalist, and imperialism is not patriotic. It is neither of those things, but those of us who oppose imperialism, we are the real patriots, and we are the real internationalists. And this should be overwhelmingly clear. We must oppose imperialism, the dying stage of capitalism, capitalism in its monopolistic, decadent, moribund stage. We must oppose the international financial order, the rule of the world by international bankers who enrich themselves as the planet gets poorer and poorer and living standards go down. And we must embrace the American people. We must embrace the working class, the people of the world who are struggling, and we must say to them that it is your historical responsibility to bring the new world into being, to stand arm in arm with your brothers and sisters against imperialism and against the big monopolies, against their war and against their low-wage police state. That is our responsibility as people living in the center of the empire. To oppose imperialism, to build an anti-monopoly coalition, to unite all who can be united, to oppose the imperialists and their policies of war and aggression. That is a direct quote from Mao Zedong. Unite all who can be united and build a united front against the imperialist monopolies and their policies of war and aggression. Unite all who can be united. Unite all who can be united and build a united front against the imperialists and their monopolies and their policies of war and aggression. That is our responsibility. We must build a pro-growth, anti-war coalition. Imagine if we had an anti-monopoly government in the United States, a government that wasn't helping crush small businesses and helping crush the working class, crushing and devastating communities in order to serve ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Chevron, Walmart, Amazon, you name it. But instead, we had an anti-monopoly government that was fighting for small business owners, fighting for the working class, fighting for communities and neighborhoods against ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Chevron, Amazon, Walmart, General Electric, and the ultra monopolies that dominate our world. Imagine an anti-monopoly government. Imagine an anti-war government, a government that was not seeking to expand the power and profits of corporations by getting us into new confrontations around the world. A government that was not building new military bases across the planet as it tried to impoverish people, but rather a government that prioritized peace and cooperation and mutually beneficial trade with other countries in the world. An anti-war government. Imagine that we had a government of action that would fight for working families. Imagine that we had such a thing in this country. I believe it is very possible. I believe it is almost a necessity in these times. We need an anti-monopoly government. We need an anti-war government. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. I want to just show you the words of the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, because at this very moment, I don't know if you're aware, but the United States is convening a peace conference for Ukraine, and they forgot to invite Russia. Now, I don't pretend to be a genius, but if there's two countries that are involved in a war, you got Ukraine and Russia, they're having a war, and you want to have a peace conference about resolving that war, you generally want to invite both of the countries involved in the war. However, the United States had the brilliant idea of convening a peace conference for Ukraine and not inviting Russia. So in Switzerland right now, they're having a peace conference for Ukraine, and Russia ain't there. Meanwhile, Russia is at the BRICS 2024 summit, and so this is what the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, had to say.
Settlement should proceed not through some limited group meetings like the one that's about to start in Switzerland, where discussions would be solely based on the absolutely meaningless and senseless Zelensky peace formula. The People's Republic of China and the Chinese foreign minister and the Brazilian foreign minister said that we need to seek a new approach and a new platform for settlement, a platform that would be acceptable by both sides and overall all the stakeholders. Clearly, nothing would be done by the Zelensky regime without the authorization of the United States. He has no right for that.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous that they would even think about having a peace conference that doesn't involve Russia. Meanwhile, Brazil, China, they've put forward reasonable solutions to the conflict. But listen, folks, we are about an hour in, and there's been a few super chats that have come in, and they are appreciated, but keep them rolling in. Give me something to talk about in the second half of the show. But for those of you who aren't aware, this weekend, I spoke at Los Angeles Family Church, and it was amazing. I got to say, the hosts, they flew me in. I arrived on Thursday. I was treated with nothing but the most amazing hospitality. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I was put up in a very nice place. Amazing food was cooked for me. I was treated with the most amazing hospitality. And then they beautifully decorated the cafeteria room of their church, the fellowship hall. Beautiful tablecloths, beautiful, images were put up, and they welcomed all kinds of CPI people and friends and allies, and many people from their church came, and it was a beautiful event. It was a beautiful event. Not only that, not only did they welcome everybody, but they even gave a lovely gift. They made these beautiful origami ornaments, and they gave them to every guest, every friend who came to the church. I mean, it was just absolutely beautiful. And Reverend Joshua Holmes, who was my good friend, he's the chief pastor at LA Family Church, along with his wife Takayo. They had an event with me. I spoke for 45 minutes about North Korea, and I gave the North Korean perspective, and they appreciated every word. And these folks are not communists. These folks are conservatives, right? These folks, this is a church that's got a lot of connections in the Republican Party, that owns the Washington Times. They didn't care because they knew that what I had to say was very important, and that people hearing what I had to say was very important, because if we want to have peace on the Korean Peninsula, we need to understand the North Korean perspective. So can you believe this? An anti-communist church with decades of history as anti-communism rolled out the red carpet, not just for me, but for our organization, the Center for Political Innovation. And they enabled me to get up and say what needs to be said about North Korea. It was an absolutely amazing event, and I am beyond honored by the event. I am just utterly blown away at how well it went. And I was invited. I gave a couple remarks at their church service on Sunday. I recorded a podcast with Reverend Joshua Holmes, and that'll be eventually out. And I got to tell you, it was utterly amazing. It was utterly amazing. I met people from our community. Shout out to all of you I met. Dan Niswander, I met you. I recorded a great podcast with him. Pasta from Convo Couch. He did a whole video. He's going to show video from the event later. He made like a whole like video piece of the event. It was just an utterly amazing event dedicated to the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. So if you haven't watched the video yet, go and watch it, right? Because events like this don't happen, right? You know, I mean, we might have a conference here and there, but this was a conservative church that supports peace with North Korea. And they said, you know what, this Caleb guy, he's been coming around for a while and he's been volunteering and helping us out. And we think that he's got an important, powerful message. And, you know, we may not agree with everything he says, and, you know, but he's a good guy, and people ought to hear his message. People ought to hear what he has to say. So, you know what, we are gonna have an event. And it was completely and utterly amazing. And I'm putting it in the chat. You can watch the video. It was an utterly amazing evening. Just utterly amazing. It was just utterly amazing. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. Right. And if you haven't watched it yet, go and watch it. Right. It was a really, really spectacular event. It was really, really great. It was really, really spectacular. And I am going to show you 2 clips of some of the best moments from my presentation. I'm going to show you a couple of the best moments from the event now. And then I will start answering people's super chat questions. So keep the super chats rolling in. Have me answer, help me, have something to talk about in the second half of the show. So there we go. First, this was one of the better moments.
Soviet Union, things were very, very bad in North Korea. There was a food crisis. They needed petroleum, gasoline to run their tractors, and they couldn't get it. And their food system came to a grinding halt, and people were starving to death. And it was an absolute disaster. And it was a very, very bad time. And many international observers looked on and they said any other government in the world would have collapsed under those circumstances. But if you look at today, the Korean Workers' Party is still in power. They're still in power. And the grandson of the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, his grandson, Kim Jong-un, is the leader of the country. And if you look at the fact that they got through a huge crisis that they now call the arduous March period in their country, where people were literally starving to death, where their food system came to a grinding halt, where electricity was limited, where things were that bad, but yet the government of North Korea did not fall, you have to acknowledge there's a lot of people who feel very, very loyal to the Korean Workers' Party. And I'm going to tell you some of why that is. And my source for these statistics is the country study published by the U.S. Library of Congress. The U.S. Library of Congress publishes a country study of every country in the world. And these statistics come from the U.S. Library of Congress's country study of North Korea. Between 1948 and 1990, the life expectancy of the average person in North Korea increased by 30 years. 30 years. Can you imagine what a 30-year life expectancy increase means? How much would things have to improve in a country for people to be living 30 years on average more than they did before? In 1955, Korea was recovering from the Korean War. The country had been bombed. Every single building about 1 story tall had been destroyed in the Korean War. And in 1955, North Korea had only 285 hospitals in the whole country. But in 1986, according to the U.S. Library of Congress, they had 2,401 hospitals. And you want to talk about a huge increase in access to medical care. You go from 285 hospitals to 2,401 hospitals. That's huge. That's a huge increase in access to medical care. When the communists took power on the Korean Peninsula, 20% of the population had any kind of education whatsoever, any kind of education. By 1956, again, just a few years after the whole country had been bombed and destroyed during the Korean War, according to the U.S. Library of Congress, they had wiped out illiteracy in the northern half of the Korean Peninsula. These are huge, dramatic achievements that changed a lot of people's lives, and they were done under the leadership of Kim Il-sung and under the leadership of the Korean Workers' Party, and they were done in the aftermath of a devastating war in which the whole country was ravaged and destroyed by bombs. And they were done with aid from China, aid from the Soviet Union, but there are millions of people who lived through that, and their loyalty to the Korean Workers' Party and to Kim Il-sung was won by seeing how their country was transformed. And we know that North Korea has been in a pretty bad spot since the fall of the Soviet Union, but it hasn't always been like that. And this is from a BBC article that was published, and they acknowledged that prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, North Korea had a bit of success. This is what the BBC article said. At one time, North Korea's centrally planned economy seemed to work well. Indeed, in the initial years after the creation of North Korea, following World War II, with spectacular results. The mass mobilization of the population, along with Soviet and Chinese technical assistance and financial aid, resulted in annual economic growth rates estimated to have achieved 20%, even 30% in the years following the devastating Korean War of 1950 to 1953. And as late as the 1970s, this is BBC, South Korea languished in the shadow of the economic miracle north of the border. And throughout the 50s and 60s, North Korea was building a huge steel industry. They were building huge modern power plants and electricity, and the country was rising up. And again, this is something that we never hear about. But these are changes that made a difference in people's lives. And if it wasn't for the fact that millions of people's lives were very largely transformed by the Korean Workers' Party, they would have collapsed in the 1990s. Another thing that's worth pointing out, since we're talking about North Korea, is we all know that back in the 1960s, there was the Black Liberation Movement here in the United States. And, since, some of the recent awareness that's been raised of Black Lives Matter, we're starting to acknowledge things like the murder of Fred Hampton. We're starting to acknowledge how, Dr. Martin Luther King was harassed by the FBI and sent a letter urging him to commit suicide. Well, at the same time that the American government was hunting down and murdering and terrorizing Black revolutionaries, North Korea was supporting Black revolutionaries. And in fact, the Black Panther Party was welcomed to North Korea with a huge parade as heroes. And the Black Panthers, they had a relationship with many different governments around the world, but for some reason North Korea was a government that they had a particularly close relationship with. If you look at old issues of the Black Panther newspaper, they've got Kim Il-sung's face on the front page, and Black Panther leader Eldridge Cleaver, when he fled from the United States, he moved to North Korea. One of his daughters was born in North Korea.
Yeah. I said all of that. I got up and gave the pro-North Korean side of the thing. What would never be allowed on CNN, I was allowed to say very openly at Los Angeles Family Church, because they understand how important peace on the Korean Peninsula is. And I'll show you one more section from the presentation. And this is where I got kind of fired up. And this is about Yumi, the teenage, or I guess 10 or 11-year-old girl who was in North Korea and had a YouTube channel and was banned by the American government. YouTube banned her channel. And I got fired up when I talked about that.
Saw, but there was a 10 or 11-year-old girl in North Korea. She went by Yumi, and she started a YouTube channel. And this YouTube channel, I learned about it from CNN. Because CNN ran an article about how scandalous it was. North Korean propaganda YouTube channel started by a 10-year-old girl. And they ran this scandalous piece about it. Well, I watched the channel. One of the videos is about her favorite popsicles, the popsicles she likes to eat. There's another video of her going fishing with her grandpa. There's another video of her going to the water park that she and her friends all like to go to. And CNN was like outraged. How dare YouTube allow this channel to exist? And they eventually took her YouTube channel down. And they took the YouTube channel down, and the reason that they gave for taking it down is they said that her YouTube channel had a, quote, positive bias toward North Korea. this, I'm like, what was she supposed to do? Make a YouTube video about my country sucks? You know, I mean, it's like, this is ridiculous. And then some people say to me, well, Caleb, you know, they're trying to say that North Korea is a paradise. They're trying to say North Korea is a paradise. That's propaganda. No, they're not trying to say North Korea is a paradise. What she's saying is that if there's a war, we're people too. That's what they're saying. And she's saying it's not just a 24/7 military parade like we see in American television. Every time they show North Korea on TV, what do you see? I say countdown. They say North Korea, and then two to 3 seconds later, you see a bunch of guys marching around like this, right? We think North Korea is just a 24/7 military parade. But there's real fathers there, there's real daughters there, there's real mothers, there's brothers, there's sisters, there's children, there's families. And if there's a war, real people are going to die. And that's what her YouTube channel was trying to say, and we need messages like that on YouTube. Having young people from North Korea making YouTube videos about their life, and having them exchange and share with people from the United States, that's the road to peace. The road to peace is through trade. The road to peace is through development. This is not just true for the Korean Peninsula, it's true for the entire...
Yeah, it was a great, absolutely amazing event. And everyone who was there, and there's people in the chat who were there, and everyone who was there really got a sense for how great it was. I do want to show you another clip, because all you've seen so far is me talking, and you all see me talking here on this YouTube channel all the time. I want to show you kind of the community atmosphere in the room. So there's another clip I'll show you in a little bit. I'm downloading it from a friend who sent it to me, but it was just a really amazing event, and I'm really grateful. I'm so thankful to the Los Angeles Family Church for putting on the event, for flying me out there, for treating me and my CPI comrades with nothing but the kindest hospitality, and being so open-minded and friendly to host such an event. You know, despite having very, very anti-communist beliefs, you know, despite very much viewing the atheistic side of communism and dialectical materialism as a very big evil. So much kindness was shown, and such a beautiful event. It really, really was. So it was great. And, you know, the event, I mean, it wasn't just me talking the whole time. There was a very lively Q&A discussion, and we even got to sing a song at one point. And I'm going to show that as soon as it gets downloaded here. I'm just going to show you a part of the meeting. We opened with singing the Heavenly Korea song of, you know, reunification, which was really great. So I'll put it on here. So if I can get that to load, I don't know why it's being weird here. All right, I thought I was going to show us singing that song. Well, maybe I'll show it later. I don't know why my clip is being weird. Technical difficulties, I suppose. But yeah, I guess I'll download it again. That was a little weird, but yeah. All right. Well, we'll see. We shall see. But anyway, it was a really, really great event, and the full video is already online. You can watch it. I'll drop the link in the chat one more time. And you can see how great the event was. And, you know, the podcast that I did while I was out there, and the, you know, the remarks I gave at the church service, that'll be up online later. I'm holding off posting that for now. The podcast isn't finished yet. I do have the remarks that I gave on Sunday morning, but I'll post that later. But, you know, we're doing it. We're doing it, and we're getting things done. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, I'm at the point where I don't care anymore. No matter what I do, all the internet leftists, all the socialists, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, and there's a collection of internet haters that will hate whatever I do, right? I could do anything and they would hate it. But of course, you know, they're making noise. Oh my God, you talked to the Moonies. Oh, rah, rah. You know, they're making noise about that. And I just want to say to those people, look, last spring, Notatol, which is the socialist Korean American organization, had a rally in Times Square, or in a rally at the UN for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we at the Center for Political Innovation, we actually asked them to participate. We sent them a very polite email asking if we could attend their rally. And in response, they sent I have never received an email so nasty, right? They basically, in semi-diplomatic words, said, no, CPI can't come because we think that you're an organization of rapists. It was like, my God, it was so vile what they did. So, I mean, they didn't just say, don't come to our rally. They said, basically, don't come to our rally because we're so scared that you might rape us. I mean, it was really vile, and they brought, and it was really a nasty thing to do. So don't say that, oh, and now you're mad that we're working with this other group. Well, we'll work with anybody to try and achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we tried to work with the leftist groups, and they don't want our help. And that's the thing. These people who get mad at me whenever I work with anyone who's not a leftist. If I worked with leftists, they would be calling up the leftists and telling them, oh, why are you working with Caleb? He's a fat, these people will not be satisfied unless CPI dissolves and unless I jump off a cliff or just roll over and play dead for the rest of my life. I ain't going to do that. I understand that it is my duty and my moral responsibility to oppose imperialism. So I am going to find a way to oppose imperialism, no matter what. So will these people ever be happy? No. And these people are nattering. I think, what was it? Richard Nixon, his vice president, Spiro Agnew. He referred to the nattering nabobs of negativism. Well, these people are nattering nabobs of negativism. At the end of the day, all they want to do and all they will ever be is people complaining on the internet, right? And it is motivated by jealousy. It is motivated by their own insecurity. And it's a way to make themselves feel better, right? And you can be sure of that. And I know some of these people individually in real life, and I can just tell you 100% how true that is. These are the most jealous and pathetic people you'll ever meet. They barely ever go outside. And when they do go outside, they look like complete doofuses. And all they do is sit on the internet and accuse people and throw mud at people, because it's a way to make them feel better about the fact that they really ain't got much going on. And, crab mentality. And, and it's really sad that that's who these people have become. That's what they've been reduced to. But you just have to decide. You just have to make a choice that those people don't matter. You have to make a decision for yourself. Nobody can make it for you. That these losers, these people who have made it their mission to try and prevent anyone from being part of our CPI community, from finding the joy that comes from being part of our community, from having the amount of political clarity we have, right? You have to decide not to listen to these people, right? And I'm at the point where I don't chase after people and I don't fool around. And if somebody can't decide that what these people are saying and what these people are doing is not worth their time, I'm not going to try and convince them otherwise, right? Because I got real shit to do. I got real shit to get done, right? And we have to build an anti-imperialist movement. We have to build a community of people who can stand arm in arm and cooperate with each other to get real anti-imperialist work done. And I will work with anybody, right? And, at this point, I would say the overwhelming majority of people in America who think they're communists and think they're socialists are nuts. They're nuts, and they're dangerously nuts. They are the foot soldiers of World War III. They hate Russia. They hate China. They think everyone who doesn't agree with them is a Nazi who deserves to be beaten up and killed. They want economic degrowth. They are obsessed with, transgender, sexual, whatever. And, I mean, I have no desire to please those people. None. My desire is to build an actual community and get ready for the coming storm, because a storm is on the horizon, and the time for fooling around and the time for being silly is over. So I just wanted to add before we start doing the roll call. A couple nights ago, people were asking my opinion of Belarus. This is the book to read on Belarus, The Last Soviet Republic, Alexander Lukashenko's Belarus by Stuart Parker. And if you read this book, you will understand that Belarus is still a socialist country. They have a socialist economy. You will understand the rise of Alexander Lukashenko, where he came from. This book is loaded with information about Belarus, well over 200 pages long. And this book will give you all kinds of information about Belarus and about socialism and why the government of Belarus is as it is. So on that note, folks, we're about an hour and 25 minutes in. Let's do the roll call. I'll answer super chats after that. So who's here with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Mark Jones in Utica, New York. It's happening, Caleb. Fists up. Balu, India. Bob in Troy, New York. Alex Rickel in Oregon, who is recording an audiobook of our book on the Houthis. Very excited for it. Keep up the good work, Alex. Can't wait to see it. Chad in Spokane, Washington. Jim in Chicago. Gabby in Chicago. Ryan in Kansas City. Alex in Brazil. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Melbourne, Australia. Eric in Lockhart, Texas. John Whitty in Houston. John McCarthy in Chicago. St. David's, Bermuda, Shanty, Mexico, Denver, Mosen, Sarah in northeastern Oregon, Patrick in Maine, Gonzalo in Argentina, Sherry Cape, May, Jamie in Boise, Idaho, Balthazar in Oakland, Abel in Wisconsin, USA, Robert in Detroit. Welcome, Robert. Based, Chad Beretta, Nate in Chicago, Philip High from the hospital in Brooklyn, had a seizure. We'll call you tomorrow. We are going to pray for you, Philip. Hang in there. I'm glad you're safe and in the hospital and watching. I'm so sorry to hear that. Hang in there. San Diego County, Piranha, Diego County, Master Jack in South Africa, St. David's, Bermuda, Louis in San Diego, Kay in New Orleans. Names and locations. Names and locations. Yeah, I'm worried about my friend Philip. It's not good news. My heart goes out to you, Philip. My heart goes out to you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Chris out in Salt Lake City. Boreal hopes Philip becomes better. Yes, we're all hoping for Philip to be better. Andy in Canada. Welcome, Andy. Names and locations. Names and locations. Kay in New Orleans, Louis in San Diego. Names and locations, names and locations. We got anyone in the Rumble? All right. Anybody else? Names and locations, names and locations. Names and locations are always appreciated. Now, we've got a few super chats that have come in. However, it is helpful if people can send more super chats. Oh, Fizzo1 in Seattle. It is helpful if people can send more. Super chats not only give me something to talk about and get me going in the second half of the show, they get me to answer questions, etc. But super chats also help me pay the rent. I live in New York City. You do not want to know what my rent is. And Philip High says, thank you. I can use all the prayers I can get right now. Well, our community is on it. Everyone who on this stream who is of faith is going to pray for you, Phil, and feel better and get the medical attention that you need, get the rest you need. Super chats, they help me pay my rent. They help me, I live in New York City. My rent is too damn high. So anything you can do to help me take care of business would be greatly appreciated. So that is always appreciated. So super chats fund the work that we do. And if you donate to CPI, I have no access to those funds. CPI funds are handled by someone else. So donations to this channel, if you are a supporter of this channel on Patreon, if you give a super chat, that goes to me directly. The stuff that is donated to CPI goes to CPI, right? There you go. All right. So I'm going to answer a couple super chats. Hopefully more super chats start rolling in. So because this has gotten weird here, I have to scroll up I have to scroll up to answer the super chats. So I'm scrolling up. So yeah, just bear with me here as I scroll up in order to put the super chats on the screen, because it used to give me a separate column for the super chats. I don't know why StreamYard doesn't do that anymore, but it doesn't. And that's a little bit annoying, but it is what it is. So I'm going to answer. Okay. Where did Sakai come from? And what is your critique? Fair question. Now, this is a little bit of communist inside baseball, but that's important because that's what we're on here. I get on here for hours and hours every night. We got time to get into some intricate and complicated questions. So let's just start with this. Right. So there's a book, and this book was published at some point in the early 1980s. And this book is called Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat. And it was a book that was published, and it was written by someone who went by the author name, pseudonym. I mean, it could have been their real name. I don't know. J. Period. First initial J. Last name Sakai. And it's a book that was published in the early 80s that argues that white Americans are not working class. It argues that white Americans are technically not workers because they are settlers, right? Because they came to the United States from Europe, and because they benefit from their white privilege, they benefit from the super profits of imperialism, that white Americans are not working class and don't have revolutionary potential. And that because of that, the revolutionary energy is only in the third world because the white workers of America are too bought off and they're too racist, and they benefit too much from imperialism to have any revolutionary potential. And that's what the book argues. I first heard of the book when I was doing work among prisoners in Cleveland, Ohio, right? I was working, with prisoners in Youngstown and other places. And among prisoners, there was a communist group that recruited prisoners, and it was called MIM, which stood for the Maoist Internationalist Movement, MIM. And MIM, as it was called, was this very bizarre communist group, and you would see their newspapers places. No one ever met anyone from the group, and they took the position that white workers in America were not working class people. They benefited too much from imperialism, etc. And they had this newspaper that was left around that you would find very big stacks of. I mean, it was a very, very big stack of of newspapers. I remember I saw their newspaper outside of Ohio State University. I would see their newspaper around Cleveland. When I first started doing political activism, at my college in Cleveland, Ohio, at Baldwin Wallace, a stack of MIM newspapers showed up at my college. It's a very mysterious and strange, very secretive communist group called MIM. And many prisoners in Ohio, black prisoners, would start getting MIM's newspaper sent to them. And it would not know where it came from. They'd say they just signed up, they just never signed up for it, but it would just start showing up. And it was this bizarre communist newspaper. And it looked rather wacky. The newspaper, it had many political correct spellings. Instead of the United States of America, it said United Snakes of America, and then 3 Ks instead of a C in America. United Snakes of America. It would spell human. It would spell human HUMMIN, because it didn't want to have man in it. It would spell woman with a Y. It was hard to read because it had so many politically correct spellings. And then it would also have pictures of famous leaders with like black magic marker, drawing like devil horns on them or drawing like vampire fangs on them. I found out that was because during the Cultural Revolution, that was a thing that the Red Guards used to do, is they used to, get a big picture of somebody they didn't like and paint, devil horns or fangs on them or whatever. That was part of the Red Guard youth culture during the Cultural Revolution. But regardless, they would, this newspaper it looked crazy. It looked mentally ill. Right. It would be left around, and these prisoners would get it in the mail, and they would wonder, like, it was just odd. And then another thing is they would all get in the mail a spiral bound photocopied edition of this book, Settlers. Right? It wouldn't be a physical book. It would just be like someone had photocopied the entire book and spiral bound it. And it was this book. And that's when I first got my hands on it. Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat. And the book is very long and it's very, it's very well written. And it makes the argument that white American workers are not revolutionary. And I would argue is very much, it's very much a buzzkill. The book is very depressing. And it has a lot of anecdotes and stories of white American workers doing very, very racist, evil things, like lynching people, like, beating up their black coworkers, like engaging in hate strikes, right? When the first black person gets hired at their job, all the white workers walk out because they don't want to work with black people. It has a lot of very sad anecdotes, and it lies. It blatantly distorts the words of William Z. Foster. William Z. Foster, he talked about one of the main reasons that his labor union, the Steelworkers Union, lost the 1919 steel strike is because the union was racist and because it was a whites-only union and the black community was used as scab labor. And William Z. Foster often used that as an example of how racism hurts all workers. But they take his words out of context to make it sound like he was blaming black people and saying black people ruined the strike because they're inferior or some nonsense. There's other examples of places in the text where it's intentionally distorting. It's intentionally distorting the activities or the words of various communist groups and leaders in order to make the case that they're racist or in order to do things. The book is a huge buzzkill, but it points to certain realities, right? Racism is a big factor in American history. The labor movement in particular has been rife with racism, and the labor unions kept black people from working in key jobs, and that was abominable. And it was the Communist Party that brought anti-racism into the union movement. Until the Communist Party of the 1930s, most unions in America were racist. And that was just standard for unions to be racist. And the Communist Party pushed back against that because black liberation was a central aspect of the Communist International. And they specifically, Lenin and others specifically emphasized the national question in the United States and how black people are a colonized nation within U.S. borders. And this book, prisoners would have it, and it was weird, a little weird, right? So I didn't think much of it. It was just this book that was promoted by this weird communist group until about a decade later, I was living in New York, and this book was everywhere. And still to this day, if you go on communism Reddit, right, this book is widely promoted. Internet communism, not in real life communism, but internet communism says this is like the most important book that was ever written. And you can get a copy of that book, and there's an anarchist publisher that's generally very anti-communist, but they decided to print what purports to be a Maoist communist book. AK Press published this book, Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat, and it's just everywhere. And it says that white Americans are not workers. And the book is hugely demoralizing because it basically says, and since the majority of Americans are white, there's really no hope for revolution here. It's a very demoralizing book. No one knows who the mysterious Jay Sakai, author of it, is, right? No one knows. What we do know is that MIM, the Maoist Internationalist Movement, the group that popularized and distributed this book, was founded by a man named Henry Park. And Henry Park was a Korean-American, I believe, mathematics professor who went to Harvard University, and he had his own communist group called Radicads, which stood for Radical Academics. They were briefly affiliated with the Revolutionary Communist Party, and they broke away to form their own group. And on top of that, Henry Park, he revealed himself. He dissolved the organization a few years before he died. He taught at Ann Arbor, the University of Ann Arbor, for many years. He was like a math professor, and he died. And the cause of death is not listed in his obituary, but it's pretty clear that before he died, he had kind of a mental health breakdown. He made a website that was constantly talking about how the New York Times articles were actually referring to him, how there was like secret code in the New York Times talking about him. The guy had some kind of schizophrenic meltdown. It's very sad. You know, and you can read obituaries for Henry Park. And they talk about, man very committed to social justice, Korean American. It's just a very sad case. I don't know what more to say about it. But that book, Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, is very demoralizing. And what I've noticed is the people who tend to push that book the hardest are white people. Right? It tends to be white people who are very frustrated with other white people, right? And they tend to think that that other white people are just bought off, and they get into this kind of like, I'm the good one and I'm surrounded by evil people, this mindset of like, well, I'm morally superior, I'm good, all the white people around me are evil, I'm the one good white person who understands about capitalism and racism, etc. It promotes kind of a very negative mindset, which was very much the mindset of the Weather Underground and the terrorist, Weather Underground and the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee. It's incel thinking, right? Oh, we can never win over, right? Is it true that for the bulk of U.S. history, the biggest barrier to working class organizing has been racism? Absolutely. That is absolutely true. Is it true that, a lot of white workers in the United States benefit from imperialism? And that affects their mindset, of course. And when I was a teenager, I lived in a small town that was mainly made up of industrial workers. Smucker's Jelly was in my town, and there was another factory in my town. There was a dairy plant, and there was a company that made parts for air conditioners and such. There were a lot of industrial workers in my town, and a lot of them were very, very conservative. They supported the wars the U.S. government was waging around the world, and they tended to be evangelical Christians. And if you disagreed with the wars or anything like that, they said you were a bad person, you needed to move to another country. And I remember as a teenager, I very much, as I was getting interested in communism and feeling very alienated and such, I very much, thought this way. But things have changed. I mean, all throughout middle America, homes have been foreclosed. Neighborhoods are dotted with empty foreclosed homes. Living standards are going down, and there is mass opposition to the wars among the American public. There is mass opposition to the government. I mean, there's a great amount of anti-establishment thinking among the white working class now. The very same people I grew up with who were blind believers in the wars and all of that, a lot of them have changed, right? And the information is much more widely available now with the internet. It's just, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the circumstances. In fact, there's more anti-establishment sentiment nowadays. There's more anti-establishment sentiment nowadays than ever before. That's weird. My Rumble is having trouble. That's weird. I've never had that happen before. We're having trouble streaming to your destination. That's weird. Yeah, and you're right about that. It is basically just Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables. Right. And it's very toxic. It's a pretty toxic book. I mean, there's really no way around it. It's a very, very toxic piece of writing. And it's designed to like feed into kind of an elitist mindset and view the bulk of the American working class as racist and reactionary. And I mean, it seems to me that some section of the American government or something, was promoting it. Or trying to get people to believe it. I've never had that happen. For some reason, Rumble just shut off. I couldn't not get your stream for a week. Well, there you go. But yeah, so it looks like my Rumble has just shut off. I don't know why that happened. But that's pretty weird. It's never happened before. Yeah. What's going on there? And it just ended my Rumble stream. That's bizarre. That's never happened before. All right. Well, Well, that's odd. We'll keep going on this platform. No worries. But yeah, so that book, I feel like it's out there to demoralize people. And I feel like, it's out there to demoralize people. And oddly, a lot of the woke stuff, the check your privilege stuff, oddly lines up with it. And a lot of the mindset that the American workers are the enemy, right? That American working people are all bought off by imperialism. They're all racist. They are the enemy. Very much lines up with, oh, are we back on Rumble? Are we back on Rumble? Right? Very much lines up. No, we're not back on Rumble. I don't know what's going on. But it very, very much lines up with that book. So yeah, I view it as a negative book. Did Henry Park actually write it? That's what many people believe, because Jay Sakai, I don't know. Jay Sakai claimed to be a former member of the New Communist Movement. Jay Sakai, if I believe correctly, claimed to be Japanese American, whereas Henry Park was Korean. So I have no idea. I'll just tell you, I have no idea who actually wrote that book. I do know that it is probably being promoted for not good reasons. Right? And there's no way around that. So, it looks like the Rumble is working. Okay, the Rumble is working. All right. Okay, great. Glad the Rumble is working. It seems to be working. Okay, we're back. We're back on Rumble. Okay. All righty. Very, very good. All right. But anyway, so that is the first super chat. And it's some communist inside baseball, but it's important. So the next super chat question, right, after the question about Jay Sakai, all right, is it has Jeff Goldblum and Liev Schreiber movie. I don't know what that means. Were you referring to the movie about how the U.S. government enabled Boris Yeltsin to win the election? Is that the movie that has Jeff Goldblum and Liev Schreiber? Is that what you're referring to? I don't quite get what you're referring to there. Is that what that is? I don't know. Okay. Very, very good. Very, very good. I don't know what that super chat is. Okay, let's see what the next super chat question is. Do you think the Communist Party of the Russian Federation could take power someday? Alex Olivier is asking me if I think the Russian Communist Party could take power someday. I'll just tell you, no, not at this time. Now, maybe the Russian Communist Party could change and go through a lot of changes, but the Russian Communist Party at this point, really since the fall of the Soviet Union, has had big problems. It lost power. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union lost power. And that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation was led by Gennady Zhuganov, and it was very much an attempt to kind of revive the spirit of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. One thing that's noted is that that Zhuganov, when he was leading the Russian Communist Party, became very nationalistic in his rhetoric. And Russian nationalism is mixed in there. Yevgeny Zhuganov is a Christian. He's converted to Christianity. He gives a Christmas message each year to observe the Orthodox Christmas. But the Russian Communist Party, from what I have seen, is very bureaucratic, right? It's very bureaucratic, and it doesn't have oomph, right? And that's why Alexander Dugin left and helped form the National Bolshevik Party and eventually, formed the Eurasian Movement. And after the 1996 elections, many people look on and feel that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation actually won those elections. But they were unable to create energy in the streets and actually reclaim the presidency. Also, in 1993, you had the Russian Communist Party won control of the parliament. And they led the National Salvation Coalition, and they won control of the parliament to stop austerity. And then the president, Boris Yeltsin, dissolved the parliament. You had the constitutional crisis of 1993. Let's see if we can find a video of that, because people forget that this happened, right? That after the fall of the Soviet Union, right? There was, at that point, there was an election in Russia, and people voted for the Communist Party. And, the Communist Party came to power, or, took control of the parliament, and then the US backed leader then dissolved the parliament, right? No one ever talks about this, but it's, kind of important, and, but, the idea that people would vote for the Communist Party and all of that, they pretend that never could have happened. But it did, and the military, the parliament refused to leave, and so because they refused to leave, the Russian military was sent to shell the parliament. They call it Black October. Here's a video, right? There's a video of it. I will show you the events of Black October, where Boris Yeltsin dissolved the parliament, and at that point, the Russian Communist Party, they did call people out into the streets, and there were, all kinds of people out in the streets waving communist flags, demanding the restoration of the Soviet Union, but there weren't enough of them, right? And if the Russian Communist Party had the strength had the ability to really call up a mass movement, it would have done it, and they didn't. Right. At that point, the issue wasn't they didn't have public support. They did have public support. Right. There was a vote at the time that the Soviet Union dissolved. Should we keep the Soviet Union? And the vote to keep the Soviet Union was overwhelming. Right. The people wanted to keep the Soviet Union. They wanted to keep socialism. However, they were not willing to fight for it. Right. And that was really the weakness of the Communist Party. And in 1996, they probably won the elections. But again, they weren't able to, to mobilize the energy from among the population to really fight to get back in power. And that, the Russian Communist Party, it is very bureaucratic, and it's very much a party that is a party of nostalgia. Now, that could change, right? Things change. But at the moment, I don't see the Russian Communist Party taking power anytime soon. And I must say this, right? Because I get frustrated because, that said, right, that I don't see the Russian Communist Party taking power anytime soon, right? And I don't think that they're going to take power again anytime soon. And I mean, how would Russia be different if it was a socialist country? I mean, I'm just asking you that as an honest question, because I hear this a lot. There's a huge amount of this, right? Well, how could Russia become socialist again? All right. The way Putin fixed Russia's economy is he, put state-controlled oil and gas at the center of the economy once again. And also, since basically at this point, the Russian economy largely depends on government subsidies. There's huge state-run industries, state-run mining, there's all kinds of state-run industries. And then especially since the fall of, or since the Russian special military operation began, right? Since then, there has been, in particular, since then, the trade of Russia is very much with communist governments. China, Vietnam. They just built a big statue of Fidel Castro. Their relations with Cuba are very, very, very close. I mean, they have at this point, a very close relationship with the communist governments of the world, and they've been locked out of the Western capitalist economy. So you're asking me, like, what, I mean, at this point, like, maybe Russia, they don't believe in Marxism, Leninism anymore, right? They don't have the Marxist ideology, right? That's clear. But in terms of what you might call, in terms of having an economy where the state is at the center of the economy and the state prioritizes economic growth, and in terms of being part of this new economy in the world where the economy is rationally organized, in a lot of ways, you could argue that Russia at this point, it has a largely socialistic and it's definitely an anti-imperialist economy. And it's an economy that's largely state controlled. Now, that state is a state that has many oligarchs and wealthy people aligned with it. And there's a huge amount of inequality in Russia. There's some people that are very, very wealthy, and that's not the majority of the population and such. But at this point, some people talk about Bonapartism. I mean, the Russian economy is so tied in with the communist governments of the world. And there is a huge amount of state regulation and control of the economy. This demand, what if I think we need to get past this fixation on is a country socialist or not, because of the fact that in this time it's about imperialism. And in this world, Lenin very clearly said that in the 20th century, it was about imperialism versus anti-imperialism. And there were all kinds of socialists, in quotes, who supported imperialism. The British Labour Party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the French Socialists, they all supported imperialism. So they might have called themselves socialists. They may have wanted better rights for workers on the job, but it didn't matter because they were still supporting imperialism. And what we learned over the course of the 20th century, and especially now in the 21st century, is the inverse of that is also true. There are all kinds of people around the world that are fighting against imperialism that don't call themselves socialists, like the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? Like I'm trying to think of, there's many examples of this. They may not call themselves that, but if you're fighting against the imperialists, you're going to have to assert state control of the economy. You're going to have to, align with the various communist governments and attach your economy to their economy. So if you're opposing imperialism, you kind of more or less end up becoming a socialist, right? And if you're aligned with imperialism, you can talk socialism all day, but you're still on the side of imperialism. You're still not a socialist. So the issue is imperialism and anti-imperialism. That is the issue in our time, not socialism and anti-socialism, right? Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and imperialism is very happy to, in some cases when it has to, put on socialist clothing, right? And anti-imperialist forces, if they get into a confrontation with the imperialists, they have to move toward a centrally planned economy. They have to align and trade with the communist governments. So imperialism and anti-imperialism is what it's all about, right? And if you want to get nitpicky about anti-imperialist countries, well, that one's socialist, that one's not socialist, you're kind of missing the point. There is a global capitalist imperialist economy, and there are various countries that have broken out of it. And the ideologies of those countries varies, and the economic model of those countries varies, but they all more or less have a state-run economy because that's the only way you can defeat the imperialists. And they're all trading with each other. So there you go. Here's a video of the constitutional crisis in Russia when, the communists, they won control of the parliament after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so then Boris Yeltsin forcibly dissolved the parliament, and there was violence in the streets. Right? They want to tell you the fall of the Soviet Union was the triumph of democracy. It was anything but that. There was a referendum. People voted to keep the Soviet Union. Then they had their first election, and the people voted for a communist government, and this is what happened. those are images from the constitutional crisis in Russia in 1993. So, it's important to talk about that. And, we all thought, when I was a kid in the 90s, we all thought that Russia was just having fireworks the whole time going, yay, we're free. It's amazing. And we heard everything got better in Russia. They finally had food because the communism's gone and they finally were so much better off. And it was all just a big lie, right? The fall of the Soviet Union was an economic disaster. Mass unemployment, mass hunger. I mean, the statistics and data all shows that. I would recommend read Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine. She talks about, the imposition of free market economics in Russia and how much it devastated the place, selling the, state farms, mass poverty, drug addiction, human trafficking, and then the people tried to elect a government that would do something about it. And the government was forcibly dissolved and the government, it was wild. Right? None of us ever heard any of that. We had this narrative that Russia was an evil dictatorship and everyone was starving. And then in 1991, they got freedom and they were just so happy and everything was great. No one ever tells you, what happened. So, and that they had free market insanity in the 90s and there was mass hunger. They tried to vote for the communists to stop it. And things didn't start getting better until the Russian president Putin got in and started reasserting state control over the economy, and things started to get better gradually. Now, I want to take this time, and if anyone has any more super chats, keep them rolling in because the night is young, and I got plenty more energy in me to talk. The night is young, so keep the super chats rolling in. But I wanted to mention, so I don't know if folks saw, but Destiny Stephen Bonnell, right? You can boo, Destiny Stephen Bonnell, you can boo. He's been running his mouth on Twitter about how people like Max Blumenthal and Gray Zone and people with anti-imperialist views, their views just can't stand up to reason, he said. Their views just can't stand up to reason, he argues, and that's why it's important to debate them, because anyone who debates them just completely, their views just can't stand up to reason. Now, that's complete malarkey. And I replied to Destiny Stephen Bonnell, this Twitch streamer, this BreadTube streamer bro, right? I replied to him because he was the first person I ever debated. The first of my debates, the whole way I found out what BreadTube was from debating Destiny Stephen Bonnell. And I debated him, I debated him and I wiped the floor with him. I mean, I have never had a debate go so well before. I just completely destroyed Destiny Stephen Bonnell. And that was my introduction to the BreadTube universe, because I'd never debated anyone like that before. So I'll show you what Destiny said on Twitter. Right. And then I'm just going to show you a couple clips of when I just wiped the floor with Destiny, that was when this channel really started to blow up. Right. That was the first time this channel really exploded. So Destiny says, he says, there's a reason why these types of people avoid conflict. These narratives and stories only survive as long as they go unchallenged. Blumenthal and the Gray Zone are massive sources of information. You should trust nothing from their outlet. And I replied, I said, malarkey. I destroyed you on Venezuela, on USSR, and on many other issues. So while I'm waiting for more super chats to come in, I thought I would just show you how some of the clips from that epic debate, the first time this channel, right before the pandemic, this channel started to really blow up. And I'm going to show you a couple of those interactions. So, right, let me just, here we go.
People don't blame Haiti for capitalism, but they do blame Venezuela, right? My understanding of Haiti is there are a lot of corruption problems that exist within that government. It's not literally just they tried capitalism and it's ruining the country. But then people do blame Venezuela. Well, that was because Venezuela, very specifically started to make socialist pivots in its economy. It started to nationalize more industries. It started to, wait, which part of that do you disagree? Do you disagree that they were expropriating industries? Do you disagree that they tried to hardcore set price control?
The rate of state ownership in Venezuela is actually much lower than the rate of state ownership
ownership in China. Other than
wait. How is that a response? No. You wouldn't compare the state.
Oil, very little is nationalized, and I've been to Venezuela, and one of the biggest problems they have is that their economy is entirely centered around oil. And when the oil price dropped in 2014, that caused a huge amount of scarcity. They need to have farms there. They need to have steel manufacturing there, and they don't have it. If they had state-run big steel mills and state-run farms and all of that, they'd be in a much better shape.
Okay. If you want to at a future debate, I would love to come back and talk about Venezuela, because I am positive that your assertions there, that it was just because oil collapsed, that's why that country fell apart, is absolutely not true. And that no person that has been involved.
Is a big problem as well.
No, not corruption. That it was very specifically. Okay, it was very specifically pivots towards trying to socialize or nationalize or expropriate parts of their economy to set incredibly restrictive price controls that caused capital industry to flee that country, that caused some firms to no longer produce goods or provide goods for its people. This is one of the large reasons why Venezuela fell. It's not just because oil prices fell a little bit. You don't see other OPEC countries.
An oil-producing country, a huge oil-producing country, bigger oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, than I've heard. The oil prices drop, and at the same time, they suddenly start having big economic problems, but it's unrelated. It's all just because they believe in socialism too much. That's what you're saying? Oil price drop of 2014 was dramatic. At that point, you could buy a family meal at Kentucky Fried Chicken that would cost more than a barrel of oil.
The petroleum sector accounts for roughly, sure. So I'm just looking this up. Sure. I'm looking this up on the fly because I know you're very incorrect. The petroleum sector accounts for roughly 87% of Saudi's budget reserves, 90% of the export earnings, and 42% of GDP. That's petroleum in Saudi Arabia. And Venezuela, oil is.
Saudi Arabia had big economic problems as well.
Saudi Arabia didn't have pictures of families eating rats off the street because their economy tanked so hard. I don't have people.
You're not allowed to.
From Saudi Arabia, crying that they're
in of the country that are guest workers, slaves. Saudi Arabia, you couldn't take a picture like that, and Saudi Arabia has had big economic problems during that time.
Sure. Okay. So look, I'm very curious. I'm just curious.
Nigeria had problems. Oil-producing countries all suffered as a result of 2014.
They did suffer.
Go ahead and let Destiny. Go ahead and get your point in.
The fact that Venezuela didn't.
Are you going to make the claim that Venezuela suffered just as much as every other OPEC country did when oil prices fell? Is that the claim that you want to make?
No.
So why did
Venezuela also suffers from sanctions from the United States? Venezuela also has big problems with corruption, and they also have the problem that they don't have. You said that the problem was they already had steel manufacturing. They already had big farms. No, the problem is they don't have it. It's a one commodity economy.
Why is that relevant? Why does that matter? You don't need to produce every good that your society consumes.
If your entire economy is centered around oil, right, and you are importing all of your food and products, and then you get sanctions imposed on you, and yes, there are big problems there, and they've manifested themselves, and I think it's interesting, though. Now, you acknowledge, what I think is interesting about your Venezuela narrative is the narrative I normally get from people about Venezuela is that everyone has been poor and starving ever since they had socialism there, and that proves communism always fails. That's not the narrative that you have. You've admitted that there were economic successes there until a certain point. Now, why does the media lie? Why can't they admit what you just said? Why
I don't know. I'm not here to talk as a Fox News correspondent. I'm just curious why you think central planning is effective.
MSNBC or CNN. None of them can admit
MSNBC
there were big
or CNN
with their socialist economy until roughly about 2014.
Why am I getting real?
Let's not
extensively obscures. Why are you saying this and none of them are saying?
I don't think Destiny wants to. I don't think Destiny wants to speak for media companies.
I'm not here to
I appreciate your honesty because everyone tells me all the time everyone's been starving ever since they moved towards socialism in Venezuela. You admit that the problems began fairly recently. Thank you.
Thank you
for your honesty. So we can agree anti-communists are liars. We can agree on that. That the anti-communist narrative that's promoted throughout U.S. society is based on deception and falsehood. Thank you for admitting that. I appreciate it.
I don't know if Destiny can
so I haven't admitted anything.
Why is it necessary to lie, Destiny? Why don't they say what you just said?
Destiny can't speak for media companies. Destiny, go ahead and respond.
Because most of the people that were alive in the United States probably either have parents or grandparents that were involved in some crazy dumbass U.S. war against communism and the idea that all commies are trying to destroy the world and blah 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 blah. And that is a lie, and it's stupid. It's incredibly stupid. The way that Americans view, if you ask the average American what is socialism, the answer they would probably give you is stealing money from the rich and giving it to the poor.
Yeah. Now look at the look on his face here, right? I got him. right? That's what the look on his face there is saying. He's like, oh my God, he got me. He got me, right? He got me, right? That's where he's at there. It's just like, Caleb made a good point. It's like this painful look like, oh my God, I actually knew my shit, right? And I can guarantee you, if he was not debating me, he would have said Venezuela was poor and starving every time they ever tried to have socialism. But he knew that I was smart enough to debunk that. And so he weaseled out of one of his usual talking points. And I just completely I manipulate his intellectual dishonesty of adjusting his argument because he knows there's someone in the room who can debunk it. I used that against him. It was a jujitsu technique, more or less, that I took the fact that, and this has always really annoyed me, right? Is that the argument is communism's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. And if I walk into the room, I'm smart enough to go, biggest steel mills in the world, Sputnik, China became a superpower. So as soon as I enter the room, the anti-communist suddenly changes the argument to, oh, well, communism, maybe they had economic successes, but blah, 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 blah. So, and it shows you they don't believe what they're saying, because if they believed what they were saying, they wouldn't change the argument as soon as somebody who could debunk it walks into the room. But that's what they do, right? Is they change the arguments they use based on who they're arguing, because it's not about truth and it's not about finding truth. It's about playing intellectual games so you can look smart on YouTube, right? And so I used the fact that he did that against him. I pointed out that what he was saying to debate me is very different than what everyone else says when debating socialism. And by doing that, I was able to use him, and I got him to basically admit, and you saw he had to admit it there, and that's what the pain on his face is. He then had to admit that what everybody knows about Venezuela isn't true because he didn't say it, right? And I used the fact that he, was acting in bad faith. Yeah, he's a bad faith debater. I used that to force him to do my job for me, right? Because whenever you're debating people, you're not debating them, right? I'm not going to convince Destiny of anything. I'm trying to convince his audience to agree with me. So I used jujitsu to get him to tell his audience the truth about socialism. And you heard him. He had to do it. He had to say, yeah, what Americans believe about socialism is yeah, anti-communism is based on lies. And I'm grinning there because he's making my case for me, because he might think he's debating me, but at the end of the day, we're arguing with the anti-communist narratives in the minds of his audience. And he had to then admit that those narratives were false, right? Maybe later on this stream, if we don't get any more super chats, I will show other sections of that debate. But that debate, I had the element of surprise. And I got to tell you, Destiny has wanted to debate me so many times since then. He's been playing that debate over and over and over again in his head, because of the fact that that I wiped the floor with him. And that's why I won't do it, because I won, right? And Destiny's audience already knows who I am, right? So what would I gain from giving him another chance, right? Having a rematch with him. I wiped the floor with Destiny, right? So much so that he's gotten desperate. He's had to do streams where he talks, he gets into ugly gossip about my personal life and all kinds of shit, because I wiped the floor with him, and he was desperate for another debate when the special military operation happened. I declined, and no, I'm not interested in letting him try to come back from that. I destroyed Destiny. The other thing, though, is I did epically well in that debate. And if you read the comments on that debate, there's been hundreds of thousands of views. Many people are saying I did amazing, right? There are still a bunch of people who can watch Destiny get epically destroyed in that debate and still think he won, right? And I'll tell you, these people, they all have troll farms, and they all have an army of just blind admirers, right? Who, he could get epically destroyed and they'd all go, oh, you got him. Oh, and that's why internet debating is pretty pointless, right? One thing I realized, and I've done a lot of internet debates now, and I will probably do them again at some point, right? I haven't had very many offers lately, but I will do it again at some point when I'm ready, or when offers come in again. I could start seeking them out, which I've thought about doing a little bit, but I'm not, I'm not actively seeking them out as I once did. But you know, but one thing I've noticed in internet debates is that you know, whenever I started making good points, I would start to see looks. Like I saw when I debated Vosh, I saw looks of like right, anger, and I would feel sad about that because with my debates, I was always trying to make friends with the person I was debating. I was always trying to win them over. That's what I've been trained to do as an organizer, right? In my debate with Vosh, I was trying to get Vosh to see things from my perspective, see that I'm not the enemy, and accept my view. Vosh was not trying to do that. Vosh is trying to play this internet, you know, I'm going to make you look stupid, I'm going to tear you down thing, right? And the same with Destiny, right? I, throughout that debate, was trying to convince Destiny that I'm a good person, that I have some good points on my side, etc. And he's not trying to do that. He's just trying to make me look bad. In you know, and that's the problem. In real, I am trained to debate like an organizer and try to win people over. These people are trained to be stupid cyberbully internet creeps, right? And that's what's unfortunate, because that's the problem with internet debates. They're not helpful, because if you in real life, if you want to win somebody over, you don't act like a jerk, right? You know, in real life, if you want to convince someone to agree with you, you don't act like a jerk. And I did very well in my debate with Vosh. I did very well in my debate with Destiny. I did very, very well in my debate with what's his name, Stefan Molyneux. But in all of those debates, I noticed that every time I made a good point or came through, they would just get painful. It's like, why are you getting painful? I'm trying to help you to understand my point of view. I'm trying to show you common ground that we have. These people don't want to, you know, you're doing the Hegelian dialectic, they're doing debate. Yeah, they don't want to be convinced. They're putting on an internet show, right, of trying to tear people down. I'm trying to actually win people over, and you know, so there you go. And maybe that approach is why I did so well, because I was trying to win at least their audience over. But I just saw that was so sad. If I debate somebody, you know, my goal is not to just knock them out. My goal is to get them to actually agree with you, right? To actually agree with me. You know, so there we go. All righty. So now we're going to answer some more super chats. If people have more super chats, keep them rolling in. And I'm told that the Rumble is working just fine. So that's good. That's good. So scrolling up to look at super chats. Okay. Scrolling up. All right. Did we do this one? Okay. Just scrolling up for super chats. Scrolling up. Scrolling up to find a super chat. Alrighty. Just want to see what the next one is. Okay, we did Alex Olivier, could the KPRF take power someday? So we did that one. So now we'll do the next one, which honestly, you know, I don't know what the person who asked the question, what their intent was, but it's a good question, right? It's actually a good question, and I'm going to give it a serious answer. I know some people saw this question, and they said, well, this is a troll question, Caleb. Well, you know what? I don't care. I actually think this is really important. Does socialism require a cult of personality? Do you know where the word cult of personality came from? The word cult of personality was invented by Nikita Khrushchev, and he was the leader of the Soviet Union. And at the 20th Party Congress, he was the new leader of the Soviet Union. And in order to solidify his power, he took a dump all over Stalin. And he said that all the lies about Stalin were true. And he said he accused the Soviet Communist Party of cult of personality. And he said they were rejecting cult of personality. And he devoted in fact, the secret speech of Khrushchev, the actual name of the speech is On the Cult of Personality and Its Consequences. And if you read Out of the Movement to the Masses, read chapter 5, I spend a long time talking about the psychology of the secret speech, because this is really, really important, right? what we've come to term cult of personality is natural human behavior. And like all natural human behavior, it can get out of control, right? I mean, obviously, right? But cult of personality, it has a Freudian name. It's called transference, right? When you are a child, you worship your parents. And don't pretend you don't. When you're a child, you look up to your parents. You think your parents are absolutely right about everything. You admire them and you depend on them. And that's a natural feeling, right? It's a natural thing, right? It's natural to look up to one's parents. It is natural to strive for a parental figure, to give you protection, to seek to get the validation of a parental figure. That is totally natural and normal. And throughout life, we look for mentors, we look for political leaders, we look for people that we study and follow and learn from, who we transfer some of that parental attachment that we have as children onto different figures. This is completely normal, right? Cult of personality, I mean, I don't even want to use that term, but it can be dangerous when people are blindly following these people without questioning, when such a person would use the fact that people look up to them and admire them in order to pressure people to do bad things or take advantage of people somehow or something, just like anything else, it can be abused, right? But the idea that having someone to look up to and having someone to seek validation from, the idea that that's somehow a bad thing, is one of the most dangerous and toxic liberal brainworms. Let me just emphasize that again. It is one of the most liberal and toxic brainworms, right? The idea that you shouldn't look up to somebody, you shouldn't have someone that you're striving to please, you shouldn't have a figure in your life who you want to make proud of you, right? You shouldn't have that, right? That is so dangerous. If you don't have that, you're weaker, right? We all want to do good. We all want to achieve good things, and that it is a natural human need to have someone in your life that you're trying to please, someone that you can look up to, someone to take guidance from, someone to give you validation and say, good job when you did something good. That is a natural human need, okay? And putting into people's minds that it's somehow a bad thing is a recipe for destroying people psychologically. And ultimately, do you know what the ultimate expression of that is? God. You heard that right. The ultimate expression of parental transference is our father or mother or parent in heaven, God. They have done studies that show that people who believe in God live longer, are happier, are physically healthier. And, that was, the psychologist Carl Jung. He said, he couldn't prove that God existed, but he certainly could prove overwhelmingly that people who believe in God live longer, live happier lives, and are healthier people. Why? Because they have a father in heaven. They have a heavenly parent, someone they can look up to, someone they can strive to please, someone they can pray to with their problems, someone they can seek validation from, someone to guide them and give them a purpose in their life, a set of principles they can measure their behavior on. This is a psychological need that human beings have. And taking that away from people, not just God, but any parental transference from people, is a way of psychologically destroying people, right? What's weird is that, there's kind of a balance, okay? Right? As you go through life, we all have parental transference. We all need an authority figure to look up to. We all need, a set of principles to live by. We all need that. But we also have libido, right? We also have, the desire to let out our rage. We have the desire to unleash our anger. And we also, to some degree or other, especially men, but women too. I mean, that we have, the Oedipus complex, or with women, the Electra complex, right? We have the, the desire to, to defeat our parent, right? And, that also exists, right? We have the desire to, when you're a young man, to some degree or other, your father is trying to emasculate you, trying to say, I'm the man of the house, not you. He's trying to weaken you. You're the young man. You want to prove to your dad, no, I'm the strong one. I am strong. So that's the Oedipus complex. That's Oedipal energy, right? And with women, there are similar things that go on. It's a little bit different because it's expressed in a more feminine way. But in the traditional family, you have parental transference, the child looking up to their parents, and then you have with what do you call it? You have the desire to rebel against your parents. You have the desire to unleash your impulses, unleash your rage, unleash your anger, unleash your sexual desires. Right? Well, this is a balance, right? Because if you go through life pent up with anger and never express it, that's not healthy. If you go through life with no sexual release, that's not healthy. If you go through life and you never assert your independence from your parents, you never, obviously part of being an adult is separating from your parents. That's one side. But parental transference is the other side. And our society has done everything it can to suppress parental transference. And on the other hand, we have amped up libidinal release. There's porn and sex everywhere. We've anger, rage, social media stokes people's rage and anger and fear like crazy, and we're breaking apart. So we have become a society that is way too far into libidinal release, into the Oedipus complex. And as a society, we've become there's way too little parental transference. And so what that makes is for very emotionally unstable, weak, and damaged people. That's what the result of that is, right? You get people that are very emotionally unstable, have no control over their emotions, have no control over their sexual desires, have no real connections with their family or anybody because they cut off all ties. And on top of that, they have no strength, because your strength and your ability, what gives you the ability to keep going, right? What gives you the ability to keep going, what gives you the strength to endure persecution and all that is parental transference. We have extreme individualism, right? And so because of that, we have a society full of weak and very emotionally unstable people, right? We have gone way too far in one direction. And cult of personality is a brain worm that Khrushchev came up with, but it became a fixation of the liberal West, right? And it is something that we really, really need to re-examine, right? Now, that's not to say that obviously worshiping anyone who's a father or mother figure, idealizing someone, being a blind believer in somebody, it can obviously have very devastating consequences. However, the idea that we shouldn't have father figures, we shouldn't have leaders that we look up to, Gavin, it was Khrushchev. It was Khrushchev who coined the term. The actual name of the secret speech was Cult of Personality and Its Consequences. And it was Khrushchev who coined the phrase. And ultimately, I believe Khrushchev did it because the Soviet Union was an atheistic state, right? The Soviet Union was already an atheistic state. Stalin brought back the Russian Orthodox Church, but the state was still promoting atheism. And then Khrushchev launched a big crackdown on the Russian Orthodox Church. And that communism very much, in order to bring itself to power, tapped into people's libidinal impulses, tapped into people's, Oedipal feelings, wanting to kill their parents and kill authority figures, right? And communism was already atheistic. And so because of that, it made sense that in order to solidify his own power, Khrushchev thought, I'll just take a dump all over Stalin, right? And what Khrushchev didn't realize is he was weakening the Soviet Union, because Stalin had been the father of the country. Stalin had been the leader who led them through, first of all, the industrialization process, led them to raise their country up from nothing and fully industrialize. Second, Stalin had led them through the Second World War, in which 27 million people in the Soviet Union died. It was just a devastating war. Stalin was about much more than a man named Stalin. Stalin became the symbolic figure of Russia. right? And this is really, really important because in order, even if Stalin had flaws, I'm sure of it. There's no way anyone in Stalin's position could have led the Soviet Union and not hurt a lot of people, right? Stalin made decisions when they had food shortages in the early 30s. He made decisions over who got food and who didn't, right? I mean, and there's no way someone's not going to be mad about that, right? There's no way Stalin could have run the Soviet Union and not hurt a lot of people. A lot of innocent people ended up in gulags, right? Even the biggest supporters and defenders of Stalin admit that, right? A lot of innocent people ended up in gulags, and a lot of political repression went on. It was a very authoritarian place. There's no way that Stalin didn't hurt a lot of people, okay? And I don't see any reason to deny that, right? But Stalin became much more than Stalin. Stalin became the symbol of the country rebuilding itself, the symbol of enduring all the hardship and sacrifices that were made during the war. Stalin became the symbol of all of that, right? And because of that, right? Because that's what Stalin became, right? To come forward and say that the man that they were all looking up to, the man who was the symbol of all they'd endured and sacrificed for, was actually no good. He was actually a mass murderer, a selfish. That devastated the country psychologically, right? That devastated the country. How could they trust anyone again? Right? If all the amazing things that had happened during the Stalin years and all the hardship and suffering they'd endured the whole time they were led by a mass murdering, selfish con man, how could they ever trust anyone again? Right? And at that point, it made people very, very, very weak. That's why I'll be honest with you all, right? I feel like there is a weird psychological manipulation going on in our time, a very, very weird psychological manipulation where they are going out of their way, right? They're going out of their way to kill any father figure, right? People are flawed. People do bad things. People make mistakes. And I mean, look, humans are humans, right? Humans are not gods, right? So, you can make anyone look bad. But I believe that there is a concerted effort. There is a concerted effort right now to kill any father figure or anyone that you could look up to as part of their effort to weaken us all psychologically. And in chapter 5 of my book, I go into great detail about this. I want to show you a picture, right? I've shown you other pictures of similar things, but I want to show you this picture. Now that I've figured out how to show pictures on here, again, they changed this app so many times they've changed this app, but I think I've figured out how to show pictures on here. So I want to show you a picture. Okay. Hold on. All right. In a second, I'll show you the picture. All right. Here we go. All right. All right, here we go. Okay. All right. Here we go. Oh, and it's sideways. Good God. All right. They made it sideways. I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay. You have to put a PDF in order to put this image on here. Yeah. And now they made it sideways. So I don't know what to say. Hold on. Just trying to figure this out. All righty. Hold on. Okay. Trying to get it so I can show you this picture, because this picture, there's so much more in this picture than you would ever realize. Right? There's so much more in this picture than you would ever realize. All right. Here we go. Right? Processing. All right. This is a picture from Russia. Now, take a look at this. And I first heard about this from an atheist called Christopher Hitchens, right? And there are many pictures like this. This woman has a Russian Orthodox icon of Stalin. He's got a halo around his head. It's like a Russian Orthodox religious icon of Stalin with a halo around his head. And it's not the only one. There are many Russian Orthodox churches where they do have pictures of Stalin. Now, there are obviously many Russian Orthodox churches where they think that's a complete abomination, right? They think Stalin, Stalin was an atheist according to almost every account, etc. But there are many people in Russia who are of Christian faith who look up to Stalin, and they credit him with bringing the church back. They credit him with defeating the Nazis, and they have made icons of Stalin. And what is an icon? I mean, we have a picture of this in the textbook. An icon, right, is a tradition in the Russian Orthodox Church of you make an image of a saint, right, or an image of a figure, right, of a religious figure. You make an image of them, right, and you look at this image and you draw strength from the image and you pray to the image, right? And that is a way to draw strength, right? And here in the textbook, we've got a picture of another woman with a Russian Orthodox icon of Stalin, right? Right? And that, if you listen to the new atheists talk, they will attack North Korea, even though North Korea is an atheist state, right? And they'll attack it as an example of religion. Why? Because they look up to Kim Il-sung and they draw inspiration from him. They're not against God. They are against the concept of drawing psychological strength from believing in something. They are against that state of being. Sigmund Freud, in his book, and Sigmund Freud was an atheist and probably a sociopath, but in his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, he describes religiousness as an oceanic feeling, right? A feeling of connectedness to the whole universe. And he describes that as primitive, and he describes that as dangerous, and he describes that as the basis of collectivism, right? And that religion is this oceanic sensation, this feeling of oneness, of being connected to the whole universe, that's what it means to be religious. And I think Sigmund Freud is exactly right. And he can't relate to it. He can't understand what it is, and it says a lot. And I think that we are in a period where God and communism and loving your fellow human beings and wanting growth and expansion and not just being a selfish, pessimistic asshole. We're in a period where the battle lines are very different than they were in the 20th century. That's all I'll say about that. All right. So now I got to go to the next super chat, right? And I'll get to the different super chats here. Scrolling up. Gave you an answer. If that person meant that as a troll question, well, they got more than they bargained for. Let me just put it that way. Scrolling up. Okay. Okay. Scrolling up. Yeah, I don't know why they changed the way they did this site. I don't know if there's a way to get it to come back where I can just put the super chats on the screen. But that's the way these things work sometimes, I guess, right? All right, so we did the cult of personality. Okay, we did that one. So then the next one, scrolling down to get to the next one. I think it's something about, okay, the next one, right? What are your thoughts on the 2030 agenda and the conspiracy theory that it is secretly a communist plot? Okay, 2030 agenda, I assume, is one of those 2030 agenda for sustainable development goals. That's degrowth, right? And the idea that it's a communist plot, I mean, Karl Marx wrote many different places that you can't have communism without vast abundance. The goal is to create a society with so much wealth that the state can break down. We learned in the 20th century that what a big mistake it is. You cannot try to create equality with willpower. You need economic development. That's when Deng Xiaoping said poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious. But to a lot of these people, socialism is synonymous with, first of all, with anything bad, and second of all, with government control. These people think social, they think that you must have complete free market capitalism. So if you're wanting to impose government control, that's communism. And they also think anything bad is communism, right? And these people come from a far right perspective. And, I mean, there's an element of Bircherism in this, right? The John Birch Society. Again, read chapter 2 of the new textbook. Right? In the new textbook, I talk about the John Birch Society of the 1950s was a far right organization that was talking about the Rockefellers and talking about the ultra rich and their agenda of degrowth and their agenda of crushing small businesses, etc. And it labeled that communism. But it wasn't communism, right? And the John Birch Society was labeled an extremist organization, and it was heavily suppressed. And, just kind of like the way they talk about Trumpers now is the way U.S. media used to talk about the John Birch Society. Because they were fighting the ultra rich, but in the name of middle class anti-communism. But the John Birch Society, they wrote extensively about how the CIA was funding liberal politics and how degrowth and depopulation and birth control and all these things were being funded by the ultra rich. That's all true. And they called it communism. And mainly they were funded by, the guy who started the John Birch Society was the owner of a candy company. I think he's the guy who invented the flat sucker, Jack Welch. And in their minds, all the ultra rich were communists. They did not understand that Malthusianism and Marxism are complete opposites, and that Marx was completely against the notion of degrowth. But, nowadays, most of the so-called communists promote degrowth anyway. So it makes sense that you would get confusion on this issue because so many of the communists out there are going along with degrowth, and they're saying the problem with capitalism is that it creates growth, etc. Marx did not talk that way, and the socialist countries certainly don't talk that way. The whole reason they've had socialist revolutions is so they can have growth, to raise their country up from poverty, to industrialize. So, there's complete delusion about that. But yes, I would believe that's why the woke faction is the most dangerous faction. They promote degrowth, and most of the so-called left has embraced them and is trying to help the government use them to suppress dissidents. So it makes sense that people would think it's communism. And the whole point of CPI is to help, try to counter that. And it gets very frustrating at times. Very, very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. Okay, so the next one here is, and this is an interesting one because I'm not sure this is true. Russia helped create the Palestinian Popular Front. You're referring to an organization called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP. I'm not sure that Russia helped create it. I'm not sure that that is true, Jerry. They may have, but the Soviet Union recognized and had diplomatic relations with Israel. But during the 1967 war, the Soviet Union gave recognition to the Palestinian Authority and also established diplomatic relations with the Palestinian Authority. But they always recognized that Israel existed. The PFLP, from what I understand, they don't recognize Israel, quote unquote, having the right to exist. So I don't know how that would work. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is a Marxist-Leninist organization of Palestinians. The founder or the leader of it is Leila Khalid. I think the founder was George Habash, but Leila Khalid is the most famous leader of it. It's a Palestinian woman who, hijacked some airplanes, and she was held as prisoner, and then Israel released her in a prisoner exchange. She's, dubbed a hero by the Palestinian resistance for her efforts to fight against Israel. And until the fall of the Soviet Union, the Palestinian resistance was largely led by communists. And now the Palestinian resistance is largely led by Muslims. Hamas, which was the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. There are some other groups that are aligned with Iran, like the Islamic Jihad in Palestine, the IJP. But it used to be that the Palestinian resistance was led by communists. One of the communist groups that was in the Palestinian resistance was the PFLP. However, my understanding is that the Soviet position was always that they supported Israel existing as a country, but they also wanted Palestinian statehood. They kind of took the position that Yasser Arafat took and that Fatah takes, right? The main faction. So, the PFLP was Marxist-Leninist. I think the PFLP got weapons and support from the Soviet Union at one point. to fight Israel, and Gaddafi certainly helped them, and Gaddafi was pro-Soviet, but I don't think the Soviet Union helped to create it. There was the Palestinian Communist Party, which was called the People's Party, and there was the Israeli Communist Party, which is majority Arab, and they have like one seat in the Israeli Knesset at this point. But the PFLP position on Israel was never the Soviet position. So it's a little more complicated than that. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine are two Marxist-Leninist communist organizations of Palestinian resistance that were very large in the 70s and 80s and still exist today, but are very small. And yeah, I don't know what more to say about it. But I'm not sure that Russia helped to create them. I'm not sure that's true, because that wouldn't make sense. I think these were, both of those groups, especially the PFLP, was a result of kind of the global anti-colonial movement, right? You had the Libyan Revolution, you had the Vietnamese, you had China. They were kind of a result of the post-war wave of national liberation movements, kind of like the Black Panthers in the United States. And you had a wave of, people that were post-World War II inspired by anti-colonial movements, the Provisional Irish Republican Army, various groups. And PFLP was kind of the Palestinian incarnation of those politics, which were sometimes friendly to the Soviet Union, sometimes, funded by the Soviet Union, but they weren't the official, Soviet-aligned group. The official Soviet-aligned group among the Palestinians was called the Palestinian People's Party. And in Israel, it was called the Israeli Communist Party. So there you go. That's my answer to that. I don't think Russia helped to create the PFLP. All right. Next question. Okay. Scrolling up. All right. We're moving right along. We're almost at 3 hours. So there you go. We're back. And we'll be back tomorrow night. Okay. Just scrolling up. Oh, okay. So there was Russia helped to create the PFLP. And then the next question comes from Alex Rickel. Thoughts on the Black Panther survival programs, possibly reviving them today? I think, in order to carry out that kind of activism, you need people with time and energy, and you need money and resources. But I think doing programs like that would be a great thing. And there's a lot of leftists who talk about creating those kind of programs, but none of them manage to actually do it. And I think it would be great, but it would require work, right? And, I've tried in the past to do that. And every time I do it, I get people who just end up volunteering with some other group, and that doesn't really help. Or I get people saying that they're doing volunteering and they don't do it. Or, it takes a lot of commitment and work to do, but I think it can be done. And I think it'd be a great thing to do it. I'm telling you this as someone who has tried to do this a couple times and failed, because I don't have the committed people to actually carry it out. It's very difficult to hold an organization together. It used to be much easier. It used to be a time when it was natural. People were members of churches. People were members of clubs. People were, in fraternities and sororities, and people were Freemasons and Elks and Moose and Knights of Columbus and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and veterans. And, there was a time when people had much more of a notion of being part of organizations. It's very difficult. Center for Political Innovation. Right now, we have meetups around the country. We have weekly Zoom calls. We have a study group that meets on Tuesday nights, or I think Monday nights. Does great work. We have, we are doing outreach. We're launching an outreach program, and I would like us to someday engage in that kind of behavior. I think that would be a great thing we could do, but it would require commitment. All right, it would require people that were willing to actually carry it out. And in the past, I've dealt with people who, it's been difficult. Let me just leave it at that. It's been difficult in the past to actually get it going. So if you, Alex, can find some other CPI members in your area that are really committed to making that happen, I will do everything I can to support you in carrying it out. Right. And I will help you, and I will, and all that, and I will promote it, and I will, and I hope that this can eventually happen. And I hope we can start doing food programs. I hope we can provide aid to people, but we need to do it, one, in a way that builds our organization. right? And that's why what the Black Panthers did was so important, And two, it needs to be done, and it needs to be, there needs to be real commitment, because when you first start doing it, it's not going to work, right? When you first start doing it, it will be very frustrating. It'll be very difficult, right? One thing I will say is that, that you have to learn patience. You have to learn patience, right? If you're going to do anything, because, it takes a long time, and you learn by making mistakes, right? And that a lot of people that I've dealt with politically over the years, what happens is they get a great idea. They're going to do something, and they start to carry it out, and it doesn't work, and then they give up. And I mean, if that's the case, you're never going to do it. You have to keep trying over and over and over again. And you have to keep making mistakes, and you have to learn from those mistakes, and you have to put one thing together with another thing. And I think that would be great, right? And I think, every history I've ever read of the Black Panthers, and I guess the FBI themselves, thought the most effective thing the Black Panthers ever did was their free breakfast program. And I think organizing community service programs in the name of socialism would be a great thing. But it would be difficult to do, and it would require a lot of commitment. So I'm repeating myself because this is something I've thought about a lot. And in our textbook, our original CPI textbook, We Are City Builders, right? I actually talk about that, right? And when CPI was formed, right? Before we were CPI, when we were Students and Youth for a New America, that was one of the things we were committed to doing. And it's just very difficult, right? I look at all that we've accomplished, right? If you haven't had a chance, right, for some reason, maybe you missed it, go and watch my New Year's video I did at the beginning of 2024. Because in that video, I go over everything that CPI did in the year of 2023. Holy shit, we did a lot in 2023. We did so much, so many conferences, so many events. And then I read people talking smack. All CPI does is go out in the middle of the woods. No. We don't just go out in the middle of the woods. I don't know where people get this, but CPI does an awful lot, right? And adding a community service component, I think, would be a great thing. And I think it would also greatly contribute to us growing and expanding as an organization. So I am all about that, right? I am all about doing that. But again, it will require patience, right? It'll require patience. It'll require, not getting success, the first time you do it. Right? I'm trying to find my, my video from 2023, because I'm making a list of the things that we've accomplished this year. We've already done so much this year alone. I mean, it's kind of amazing, what we've accomplished. So let me find, I will try to just show you the first bit. I'm not going to show you the whole video of what we did in 2023, but I'll show you what we did. The New Year's message I made in December of 2023. And I'm going to make another one this year, and I'm already keeping track of everything we've done as an organization. We have moved mountains, here's our movement is growing. What did CPI do this year? What's planned for 2024? All right, I will put that on for a brief moment, and I'll show you everything that we accomplished. We just keep marching ahead. And if you want to add, if you are interested, Alex, in adding a social service component, a food program in your area, and you can find people that are committed to doing it, I am for it. I think that would be a great contribution to our organization. Now, the next super chat we have, imperialism costs millions of lives, which is why we need socialism. This super chat costs $10. Not a lot for free today, but guess what is? Jesus is offering eternal life for free. Acts 16:30. Gavin, we love you. And, it is great that Gavin is part of our organization. Gavin is a very, very dedicated Christian, and he has a very specific understanding. He is, I believe, a fundamental Baptist, and we love Gavin. He's a beloved member of our group, and Gavin was kicked out of his, of his DSA chapter because of his views on abortion, and that's horrible. And we actually, at one of our workshops, we talked about how proud we are to have someone like Gavin in our group. Gavin is dedicated. He's worked on his campuses to promote CPI material, to do outreach. Gavin has organized, all kinds of stuff. And he brought his dad with him to one of our retreats one time. And Gavin's traveled around the country to do CPI stuff. We absolutely love Gavin, right? And the idea that DSA couldn't have Gavin in it because he's a very dedicated Christian who's against abortion, against gay marriage. I mean, it just shows you these people aren't serious. They're fools, right? The left are made up of fools. And Gavin is such a great person to have in our organization. Very active, despite the fact that he's in school, and we love you, Gavin. And and you are a Christian, and you have helped me to learn a lot about Christianity over the years. I've learned a lot about the Bible and the way different Christians see things, and I appreciate everything you do, Gavin. And hey, if you want to come on here and talk about the Bible, I think that's a great thing to do. And, we just love having you in our group. So my hat off to you, Gavin. You are a beloved member of our organization. And there we go. All right. So on that note, I am going to put on I'm just going to show you what we did in 2023, right? Because again, I read someplace, not going to say where, somebody was talking about CPI, not going to say who, and they said that we did nothing. We do nothing but go out in the woods. And I just thought that's bizarre, because most of our activity takes place in major cities. So we don't just go out in the middle of the woods. Like, this is our video of what we accomplished in 2024 or 2023. Greetings, everyone, and Happy New Year. This is my annual report about what the Center for Political Innovation has done in the year of 2023. Now, we've had scores of new members join, and we've engaged in all kinds of very serious activities aimed at spreading anti-imperialism and a message of revolutionary hope and optimism among the American people. I will quickly go over some of what we accomplished in the year of 2023. On February 19th, the Center for Political Innovation sponsored the biggest anti-war protest that has happened in 20 years. The Rage Against the War Machine rally brought together a number of important personalities, different figures, to oppose the drive toward war against Russia and China. We then sponsored a reception that took place after the Rage Against the War Machine rally, where we gave a platform to Scott Ritter. Our reception, held at a hotel near the White House, was attended by over 160 people. It was a great... There's Gavin. Look at that. ...step forward for our organization. March 5th, we published this book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. The book has received a number of very positive reviews. It was featured on Kim Iverson's show, and hundreds of copies of the book have sold. I recently signed a contract for the book to be published in Chinese, and that's coming up in 2024. Now, March 25th and 26th, we held a 2-day Summit Against Hypocrisy in Washington, D.C. to counter Joe Biden's Summit for Democracy. 75 people attended this 2-day anti-imperialist conference. Peter Coffin created a documentary film about it. March 30th, 5 members of the Center for Political Innovation confronted Tsai Ing-wen, the so-called president of Taiwan, when she was in New York City. We confronted her saying, "Stop selling war in our country." The video clip of us confronting the Taiwan official went viral in Chinese media. We were featured in the Global Times. Center for Political Innovation joined the Libertarian Party and the People's Party to have a rally in New York City's Union Square, raising awareness about the need to stop the war drive against Russia and China. Our rally then marched from the Union Square Assembly Point up to the United Nations, where the New York City Peace March, convened by religious leaders, was taking place. We joined the religious rally where the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that's facing heavy persecution at the hands of the U.S.-backed NATO regime in Kiev, was given a platform. I also took the podium to represent the Center for Political Innovation alongside a number of New York City's most prominent pastors, imams, and rabbis. And later, the Center for Political Innovation was invited to a reception at the United Nations to discuss future peace marches convened by clergy in New York City. In June, the Center for Political Innovation held a weekend workshop in Missouri. 40 people gathered for 3 days of socialist education, group bonding activities, discussion, and strategy. On July 10th, the Center for Political Innovation convened an event in New York City called Money and American Injustice. The event featured critiques of the U.S. legal system and how it unfairly targets low-income and working-class people. The guests of honor were representatives of the People's Democratic Uhuru movement that are currently facing an FBI, Department of Justice indictment, calling them Russian agents. Peter Coffin made another documentary film highlighting the event and how the U.S. legal system unfairly targets the working class. On August 6th, the Center for Political Innovation co-sponsored a National Day of Action called Humanity for Peace, convened on the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. In Portland, Oregon, and in Chicago, we organized the rallies, and in New York City, we brought a very large contingent to join the rally, along with a number of other organizations. On August 27th, the Center for Political Innovation published this book, Letter to Bob Avakian, critiquing a prominent U.S. communist leader for his failure to stand with Russia and China, and exposing his ties to French intelligence and how he was used by the FBI to intimidate Jimmy Carter and harass Deng Xiaoping. On September 15th, the United Auto Workers called a strike for better wages and conditions. Among those striking was a CPI member named Tom Michalak, who stood on the picket line with his union brothers and sisters, presenting an optimistic anti-imperialist message of city builder socialism amid this important labor upsurge. On September 20th, during the United Nations General Assembly, the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ibrahim Riazi, sat down with myself, the founder of the Center for Political Innovation, for a full interview. Now, the interview was broadcast over RT News, translated into many languages, and viewed by millions of people all across the world. In October, as Gaza faced a brutal bombardment at the hands of Israel, CPI members joined pro-Palestine rallies across the country, standing in solidarity with the Palestinians and arguing that the continued support for Israel and its crimes goes against the interests of the American working class. On October 25th, the Center for Political Innovation was formally selected by the Russian Foreign Ministry's Youth Office to lead the American delegation to the World Youth Festival taking place in March of 2024 in Sochi, Russia. We were honored to take on this responsibility and immediately spoke with the Party of Communists as well as the American Student Union. And we have now successfully formed a national preparatory committee for an American delegation to the festival. I personally attended the International Council of the World Youth Festival that took place in Moscow. November 4th, the Center for Political Innovation was a co-sponsor of the Black People's March on the White House, highlighting the Uhuru movement and their persecution by the Department of Justice. CPI member John McCarthy was invited to speak at the rally, and afterwards had dinner with Chairman O'Malley and the leaders of the Uhuru movement, who personally thanked CPI for our efforts and hard work in support of them. On November 19th and 20th, the Center for Political Innovation's president, Elizabeth Young, attended the 5th International Conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform in Athens, Greece. Elizabeth spoke to the gathering, highlighting the urgent need for anti-imperialist organizing in America and explaining CPI's role and activities. On November 30th, CPI organizers visited 3 different campuses in Portland, Oregon, and unfurled American flags and Palestinian flags, as well as a banner that said, "Money for jobs and schools in America, not weapons for Israel." Footage of these dramatic interventions that were very well received by passers-by and locals in Portland will be included in Peter Coffin's upcoming documentary film. December 1st, the night before our national convention in Portland, Oregon, we held an event at a church, along with the Party of Communists USA, to give a platform to Jyoti Brar, the leader of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. She spoke and gave a lengthy presentation about the need to stand with Russia and China, the need to stand with Iran and the Palestinians, and the fight against opportunism in the international communist movement. On December 2nd, the Center for Political Innovation held its first national convention in Portland, Oregon. The event was attended by over 150 people: Scott Ritter, Garland Nixon, Syed Hosseini, Jyoti Brar, Lee Stranahan, David Rovics, and many other prominent guest speakers performed and spoke. In addition to that, we had guest speakers from Veterans for Peace, Seattle for Assange, the Party of Communists USA, the American Student Union, and other organizations. Chairman O'Malley of the Uhuru movement made a special video message thanking us for our support and supporting the conference overall. We also had video messages from Tara Reid and Craig Pasta-Jardula of the Convo Couch. On December 3rd, members of the Center for Political Innovation, who are of religious inclination, founded City Builders Ministries at a special gathering in Portland, Oregon. We discussed about building a campus ministry oriented toward anti-imperialism and working-class politics, showing that Christianity and socialism can overlap, especially in the 21st century. December 8th, 9th, and 10th, we had yet another weekend workshop, this time for new members in the Pacific Northwest region. A number of people have joined the organization since our December 2nd convention, and I think it's fair to say that our organization is marching ahead. Now, so that is what we did in the year of 2023. And as someone pointed out, that is more than like 5 organizations did in a year. I mean, that was amazing. And we've already done a huge amount this year, and I'm not going to go over that now. But, you know, I read somewhere that all we do is go out in the middle of the woods. Like, I mean, we have workshops. Yeah. You know, we had a workshop in the woods in Vermont. Last year, we had a workshop in the woods in Missouri. We have one workshop a year, I guess a couple, you know, sometimes, but like most of our activity goes on in major cities, and it goes on not in the middle of the woods. So, you know, there are people that are just determined to smear us and use anything to say anything. And like, you know, just very childish. That's all I can say. We've done quite a bit as a group, and we continue to do quite a bit. And we exist in order to carry out operations and to get real shit done. That's why we exist. You know, so, yeah, we do quite a bit. So yeah, well, look, it's been a great stream, folks. Yeah, we're well over 3 hours. So I'm going to put on the closing music, but I'll be back tomorrow night. So yeah, talk to y'all soon. Be in touch. Be in touch. I'm going to put on the closing music. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.